try that again.
No, it's okay. You're good.
Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll call? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All members of the council are present.
Thank you. Do we have a need for a closed session, Mr. City Attorney?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we have a closed session regarding public employment pursuant to Government Code Section 54957. The title is City Manager Recruitment. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments before convening to closed session?
Not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Then I will recess to a closed session.
There she is.
Here I am. I had to find my card.
Okay.
Good evening. We are now out of our closed session, reconvening the City Council special meeting on Tuesday, May 23rd, 2017. It's now 8:09. Do we have I guess we need to do Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have an invocation?
No
No.
invocation.
Okay.
No invocation, just pledge.
Mr. Miller?
Face the flag, after me. I pledge allegiance
Thank you. Okay, I will open up the public comment portion. There is a 3-minute time limit, so we ask that you please be cognizant of our time limit. And all comments are to be directed to the City Council. And please, no personal attacks. We will try not to attack you either. No, seriously, we will all be civil. And anything that you say up there as part of the public comment, please be aware that we're very pleased that you come and speak to us, and we welcome that. However, we can't discuss any public comment from the podium if it's not an agendized item under state law. We're simply not allowed to discuss any business that is not on our agenda. If you have any handouts, the city clerk will take those from you and distribute them to us. And I would ask that you please state your name and your city of residence for the record when you get up. So I understand we have one public comment.
Madam Mayor, that is for the first item, so we have no general public comments.
Okay, so no general public comment, so I will close the public comment portion of the agenda and go to unfinished business. Our first item, fiscal years 2017, 2018, and 2018, 2019 budget. Okay, so did you have a separate staff report prepared for this?
I have a PowerPoint presentation prepared, but I'm going to defer and follow the lead of the City Council, and we'll go wherever you want to go. And
Okay,
so I don't have to do my presentation, but I do have one ready.
okay. Because we did We did hear your PowerPoint presentation last time. It was quite exhaustive and very thorough. Thank you. So I was going to, well, first I guess we could take the public comment portion on this agenda item before we turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem here. Thank you. Mr. Buckhill, you are first and last.
Thank you, and I bet you're glad.
Bet you're
Buck
glad.
Hill, a 19-year resident of Dana Point. And I wanted to thank each of you for this extra work you're doing on the budget. It's a terrific service to the whole city, and I applaud your efforts and sympathize with the amount of time and detail. In order to make it easier for you to understand why budgeting's a big deal this year, I've given you this little handout. And what this shows, these bars are kind of like the bank account of Dana Point. It's not that simple, but they're the total of all the funds that are spendable. And leave out the agency-type funds, like we hold money for the T-bid and we hold deposits and things that aren't Dana Point's money but are in our bank account. So what this shows, in a fund versus cash, these funds include accounts receivable and payables, so they don't quite balance with the cash balance that Mike reports every year or every month now because of the receivables and the accruals. What this shows, though, is the fund balance. Back in 2008, it was about $55 million. The projection for this year, the end of the year, is 20.8 total funds that are spendable by Dana Point. And projected for 2022, which is Mike's 5-year plan that's in his budget package, it drops down to 9.8. So we're on a pretty terrific slope. What happened is we used to have about 2 years' total expenses in the bank. And we're going to get down to a point where we're going to have about 25 to 30% of a year's spending. And to live the way this plan says in 2022, we're going to have to cut our reserves. We'll have to use them. What's behind this are the numbers that I've got in here. And they were gleaned from the CAFRs of each year, and I broke the balances out. Mike had a copy, and we kind of went over it yesterday. I've done the best I can. There may be some errors, but it attempts to be very factual through the history. And through 2016, it's right out of the different CAFRs. For 2017, it's the new budget, which Mike has presented to you. And then the plans 18 and 19 18 and 19 are the detailed budgets. And then 20, 21, and 22 are Mike's 5-year plan numbers, just to show you what happens. So you can see we've gone from total prosperity to budgeting is much more important. And thank you for all your efforts to make these tough decisions on what should we spend and what shouldn't we. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Any other comment?
Oh, if I could have one thing. For anybody who's interested, there's another financial review meeting tomorrow afternoon, 4 to 6. You'd all be welcome. We're going to also do the same kind of workshop you're doing.
Okay, so our Financial Review Committee's meeting next,
4 p.m. here.
here in the City Council, tomorrow. Thank you. And that is a meeting that's open to the public. Any other comments?
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so I'm closing the public comment portion of Agenda Item 1 and going straight to the agenda item. Mayor Pro Tem, I believe you had some comments?
Yes. Let me put on that. Yes, so I requested this workshop at our last city council meeting a week ago, and to sort of set up what I think we can do. When I looked at the overall plan to get a budget passed by the end of June, we really, as a council, didn't have an opportunity, a workshop scheduled where we could just kick ideas around among the 5 of us about what, where we are and what we might do. And I really thought that as part of the budget process, since it's so critical to, the city to get, to work through the budget correctly, that we needed that opportunity. So that was the reason for the request. Where we are in the budget process, and Mr. Killebrew, weigh in if you think I state something that's incorrect, but Mr. Killebrew and I and Mr. Denny have worked a bit at the budgeting. We set out to do what we call a stabilizing budget for a year to make sure that while we went through and re-looked at our overall city strategic plan priorities and budgeted to priorities, that we bought a little bit of time without running the city funds down further while we were doing it. We got presented back last week our first real look at the budget that the city has prepared as a result of that. And I think that it met our basic goal of holding expense flat from the 2017 budget to the 2018 budget, which so it's the first look at how we would do that. The offsets in it that we had asked for, as we know, the police services contract added, so we needed to offset that add somewhere. And then we also wanted to actually budget some of the capital improvements that we needed to do, some of the street improvements that have been that are in need of handling, and also some facility improvements. So I think we got $2.6 million set aside for getting some capital improvements done. So that's helped, and we had to offset that to hold the budget. So ultimately, when we look through this budget, in most departments across it, we're going to find they're down from what they were in 2017 to help offset that. Now I think what we ended up with, and I think it's clear if I could get Mr. Rose to put up Mike's PowerPoint from a week ago and get me to page 20, we can look at what I hope we can now tackle from that. And what this number shows, essentially, as we pull it together, is that even with the budget that we now have in front of us, in 2020 we have a hole that we have to fix. Okay, and waiting until 2020 to begin to tackle it and get that 1.648 million will make it extremely difficult. So each year between now and then, if we can carve some of that away, then when we get there, the hole might not look as deep, and we'll have a better chance. So before we approve this budget, I wanted to figure out if there's any room for us to get a little bit more out and make that hole a little less deep. But everything we don't get done this year, next year, and the following year, we'll have to do. So anyway, I thought this was a good workshop for us to figure out just what we could agree that we could do. I don't have all the answers here, so I didn't come prepared to tell you how we were going to just do this. I came to ask that we all put our heads together and say, what do we think we can do? And my suggestion on it would be just, if we can walk through the budgets and look at the departments and say, let's look at what we've changed here. And I think Mr. Killebrew's got enough pages on his to answer some of the questions about what he actually changed in the budget, and then we can see if there's anything else in there that we think as a group we could agree we could change or do something with. Does that seem workable to my fellow council members to just start walking through and figuring it out?
All right, I have a question and clarification first, just so I understand what we're doing. Okay, so what I heard is we started with the 2017 budget,
Right. We started with the
As our base.
2017 original budget, not the amended budget, but the budget that was passed for initially 2 years ago for 2016 and 2017. So there was a budget that we entered year 2017 with. That's what we started with as a base.
Okay, so we started with the fiscal year 2017 budget. We had to add 2.9 million to that budget for the capital improvements that need to be done, maintenance, repairs, things like that?
I think in the first year of it, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 2.6 million we set aside for some of the capital improvements, street and facility total, I think something in it.
That's correct.
Okay, and then we added
And then
another,
we had 600,000 for police services to it, and then we had to back that off.
so to get to a flat budget then that didn't increase expenses over that fiscal year 2017, we had to take out that 2.6 million plus the 600,000 somewhere else.
Right, I think, the revenue went up a bit, so anyway, and, since Mr. Killebrew actually did the work, he can answer that more succinctly than I can, I think.
My presentation is before you in hard copy, this week's. Slide 9 is up on the screen.
Okay,
I think that's a higher level view by department in the general fund, what the changes are from the base budget in FY17 to the proposed budget for FY18, again, by department.
okay, but before we got to that, I was just trying to understand where we started. So we started with fiscal year 2017, we added 2.6 million in repairs, maintenance, improvements. We added a little over 600,000 for the police contract, and then you either added projected revenue or backed out other expenses elsewhere so that 2.6 million and 600,000 plus was accounted for, and we wound up with no additional expenses in our operating budget over 2017.
We didn't reduce, we attempted to keep the fund balance as close to level as we could. I don't know what it is, but it was close.
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses. What you see on the screen there is the delta, the change in expenses, if you will. So, I mean, we could start on the expense side, or if you want to go through the revenue side, I can, I don't have a slide for that, but we can talk about what changed for revenues. I thought the 5-year plan section of the budget, as well as the budget message, covered both revenues and expenses quite extensively as far as what's changed from 2 years ago when we put the budget together for FY17 to what's being proposed today. I'm not really clear on how you're proposing to proceed here.
Well, I was just first trying to understand how we got to where we are before we start proceeding with explaining it in detail. So maybe I didn't make that clear, but that's what I was attempting to do, to explain how we got to where we are on our proposed fiscal year 18 budget. We were trying to make it a stable budget from 2017. That was my understanding, right?
If I could get the slide 20 back up, that was a minute ago, maybe I can explain it, tackle it another way to answer that question. On the very bottom of this slide is the total general fund balance, and we were trying to hold that level through these budget years and not have that balance decrease.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And even though there were some expenses that had increased, there were compensating,
The revenue increased. We took a slightly different approach at revenue in that we weren't trying to be too ultra-conservative and sort of hope we could get some capital improvements at the end of the year by being a little conservative on our revenue and a little conservative on expense. We actually tried to be more realistic. So the revenue went up a bit. We cut expenses in some departments to offset. We added the capital in as a budget item as opposed to sort of having to deal with it as the leftovers at the end of the year, if you will. But we were trying to hold the general fund total balance level. And there's another little bit and piece of it that sort of becomes problematic in that as the revenue goes up, the reserves go up. So we also had to offset those reserve increases a little bit. So the work was done as we had asked to try to hold that level. And so the good news is in this, that was I think we had an excellent first cut at this. But 2 years from now, we still have a hole. And it will be easier to address each year than it will be to wait until the hole is on us and address it. So I'm hoping we can find a little bit more to take out of the budget as a group this year. I don't know if we can, but I think it's worth a shot.
And so the whole is this 1,648,098 in 2020.
Yeah, that's our forecast hole.
So
That's correct.
what you're trying to do is, instead of,
If I could take $600,000 or $500,000 out this year and $600,000 out next and the next, that would be easier than taking 1.6 out, a
Okay.
bit after that or something like that,
okay,
right?
so you're just trying to be able to spread this 1,648,000 over 3 years versus trying to deal with it in 2020 as one big bite.
That would be ideal. If we could pull that off, I would feel like we had made real progress.
Okay, and then in 2021, assuming we do that, then we have to find the 391,493 in that year.
Yeah, we still don't, the following years, we still have some work to do, but I want to try to get it into chunks we can digest right now a little bit, and so I'm hoping we can make it a little bit more forward.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have
All right, so,
I think Mr. Tomlinson would like to weigh in.
I've got some burning questions.
okay, Mr. Tomlinson.
Okay, the handout that we have in front of us tonight, page 9.
Which handout?
The one that,
I've got,
the new one, May 23rd, 2017, proposed operating budget, capital improvement program, fiscal years 2000, okay, blank, blank, blank.
Yep.
Okay.
okay,
Okay, now if you look at, and then we had the slide that was up there before, so it says adopted FY17, and then it says 34,000. I'm showing, the other slide shows about 36 million. And so, can you explain to me the difference between the two bottom numbers and for adopted FY17 and proposed FY18 from the slide that was up earlier with the structural solutions on it?
okay, so we're looking at,
So I think what you should do is probably put up the page 20 from beforehand, and then there we go. And now we can use our handout to look at,
Let's start with just the 2017 number, which is the first column on this page.
yes, sir.
It's an amended budget, which includes all the budget adjustments that have occurred since the beginning of this fiscal year that we're in. So the rollover budget, and I actually do have so I'll talk about some of the budget adjustments, and we're looking at the expenditure number there, which is 36,806.
Correct.
Included in that, so the difference between, I believe, the chart you're looking at, Paul wants to look at the base budget from 17, which is the original adopted budget,
Okay.
which you have on that handout from tonight's presentation. From last week, what you see on there is the current amended budget. Included in that $36,806,233 amended 2017 budget is the base number you have in your left hand, John, plus budget adjustments that have occurred since the beginning of the fiscal year. There would be a sizable number of budget adjustments that were made in our rollover. That includes, among the items, $2 million was added to the $34 million base budget to transfer to the capital improvement program from last year's, from the FY16 surplus. We also added quite a few contracts in regards to the development activity in town. Geotechnical engineering contracts were in the $330,000 range. We had a pocket mouse grant for $30,000, parking lot repairs for $60,000. We bought the police chief a new vehicle for $33,000, and we had a host of Doheny Village Plan related consulting contracts that in aggregate, I believe, were in the $800,000 range. Subsequent to that rollover report in September, on any given Tuesday night, there might have been a budget adjustment here or there, but bigger ones would have come in the mid-year report, which would have been in March, where we took into account all the extra litigation activity in particular associated with the strands. So we had city attorney plus outside attorneys, 360 on the city attorney, and outside attorneys were in the $300,000 range. We also had the city clerk was expediting some of the microfiche projects. That was $40,000, and we had the infamous City Hall women's restrooms for $80,000. And again, on any other given Tuesday night, there was a smattering of smaller adjustments that would have occurred. So this,
The restrooms are absolutely essential, by the way, so I'm not going to go over that again, but
so that's the difference between the number in your left hand and what's shown on the screen. So
okay.
Paul's asking to look
Yeah,
for
there-
base budget to base
Yeah.
budget.
Okay, and then proposed 2018 column is different here on this sheet than the one that we're looking up on the screen. So the one on the screen says 34,223,000. Proposed budget in this page 9 of this handout is 36,843,000.
What you see on the screen is all inclusive and includes capital. The number from last week, the capital was down below. And also included in this number is $30,000 a year. That's actually it's in the non-department that we pay for operating the funicular free of charge instead of charging. We actually have to transfer money out of the general fund into our community facilities district fund to cover that cost. So those are the differences. But the big number here is capital's included in this number, and in the number from last week, if you flip back, Mike, to the other one, if you look under the FY18, you'll see capital is down below. It says transfers to CIP. It's actually right in the middle. Facilities funds at $2,620,000. So
Okay, did I catch you correctly? The funicular is $30,000 a year?
to operate it without charging, and that's the deal we have for the facilities assessment there.
I was unaware of that. Okay.
It
Next
occurred,
follow-up
it occurred before you got here. So
Okay. Now, the structural solutions that you proposed were both income cuts, or expense cuts and income increases. So those numbers you felt were pretty conservative. So I guess what Mayor Pro Tem is asking, can we transfer some of those structural solutions to 2018 and 19? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, what's included in the 19 budget, as Paul mentioned, is the change in philosophy, if you will, for projecting revenues, where previously there was ultra-conservative. So the $36,877,116 you see in FY18 is less conservative, but I'm still very confident that we'll hit that number and probably exceed it a little bit, just nowhere near what we've historically seen. And that goes the same for 19. When you go out beyond 19, I get more conservative with the revenue projections. On the expenses, what you see in 18 and 19, where historically we had, I've said the 150-year storm numbers in some of our budgets. It's having enough budget without having to come back and ask for appropriation to address anomalous large-scale events, if you will. We dialed a lot of our contract budgets back down to what we had seen historically, plus still had some extra money in there, the just-in-case money that we're confident that we'll be able to live within those budgets if we don't have a 150 or 200-year storm. So it's less conservative. So what you've seen historically in annual surpluses when we closed the books that had gone up, I believe, to the $4.5 to $5 million range, budget versus actual. The actual surpluses were down. We're down probably this year. We're going to be just looking at. I came in over the weekend and updated my revenue numbers. That between revenues and expenses, we're going to be between $1.5 and $1.9 million of surplus that we'll be able to carry into next year. That's not included in any of these slides. And I actually have in my tonight's presentation a discussion on those if you want to go there. But those aren't, that surplus isn't included, but when you look at 18 and 19, what I'm saying is with the less than ultra-conservative revenue projections and less conservative, more aggressive expenditure budgets, don't expect to see those large surpluses.
Correct, and then, okay, yet
But
another
I
question.
still expect to beat those revenue numbers, and I still expect to come under those expenditure numbers, so I would still expect to see a surplus.
Now, on the handout we received from Mr. Hill this evening, years 19, 20, 21, and 22, were those based off of where we had projections from before we started this budgeting process without the structural solutions?
The history is he's getting that out of our annual financial reports, but I believe without auditing these numbers that the intent here is he's using the 18, 19, and the projected numbers from the budget showing here, but I believe he's also not showing any solutions. If we solve the 1.6, or I shouldn't say if, when we solve the 1.6, when we solve the 391, and 2022 solve the 518, his numbers won't come to fruition.
Okay, that
All
was
right, Buck?
That's correct.
Okay, so these are out without structural solutions. Now, explain to me again how a possible surplus of 1.1 to 1.9 million dollars comes into play in these calculations. Now, you said you had a slide. Maybe we should let you go ahead and do your presentation.
Let's go. It's actually the first thing I was going to try and tackle.
All right, well, let's,
Okay, well,
And it was more of a warning than it was a celebration.
okay, did you have any further comments before we do Mr. Killerbru's presentation?
No, if, I mean, Mr. Tomlinson, did you get your questions answered for the moment, or did you suggest?
I
we
did.
just
Sorry
let-
for
oh.
the expanded
No,
question
no,
list.
that's good.
Okay.
This is a discussion among the five of us, so anytime we have questions, we should try to get them answered, right?
I'm fine for now, Mr. Mayor. Pro Tem. No further questions, Madam
Okay.
Mayor.
And did you have anything further you wanted to say before I ask Mr. Miller what he wants to say?
Oh, no, I don't.
Okay,
I'm good.
Mr. Miller.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Could you go back to slide 20 real quick? I'm looking at the increase in reserves of $760,000 in 2018. Why is that number so much larger than every other year that's up here?
That's going from ultra-conservative, the numbers generated by 20% of budgeted revenues for emergency reserve and 10% for our cash flow reserve. So any growth in revenue, in our operating revenues, 30 cents on the dollar goes into the reserves. So going from ultra-conservative projections to these projections, plus revenue growth that we were projecting, just baseline, actual revenue growth results in 760,000. So that's 30% of the growth in revenues. That's a combination of the change in budget philosophy and growth
So that's $760,000 we're going to have to put into the reserves this year.
per policy.
Right, absolutely, right. Okay. All right, thanks.
Anything further?
No, not yet.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
No, I don't have
Mr.
anything.
Vazorek? And Mr. Tomlinson, you're good? Okay. Mr. Killebrew, if you would like to go through your presentation, please.
I'm just going to go through the first couple pages here and then turn it back over, and if whatever you're wanting to talk about is relevant to other pages, then we'll flip to that. So this chart is a condensed version that was shown on page 30 of the budget, and this is the revenues are the blue line. So this will be slide 2 of your handouts. Revenues, the blue line, operating revenues, operating expenses in the red line. So as you look at the chart over on the right, I put a box that says operating surplus. So the blue versus red, the number in between there is our operating surplus. With this year's budget, we added capital projects investment, which takes the red line up to where the green line is by adding the several $1 million toward capital improvements.
Could I ask you a question
Sure.
before we go on? Okay, so when you say capital investment, is that including repairs, maintenance, deferred maintenance, that sort of thing, or something
We-
brand new?
We have a lot of maintenance money in our operating budget in the red line. When we do major maintenance projects, counting-wise, more than $50,000 on projects qualifies as a capital. We do that often in capital projects, in the capital projects fund. So what you see in taking the red line up to the green line is the money that's transferred into the capital projects fund and also the facilities fund. Capital fund is typically our street systems. The facilities fund are all of our buildings and water treatment, just to simplify.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, capital fund is more than just something new we're doing?
Correct. It can
Okay.
also be new, it's also new stuff that are large
Also new
capital
stuff.
items.
Okay, but it doesn't have to be new stuff. So this is basically anything that has a life beyond a year?
My projections here don't show any new stuff. This is trying to take care of what we have.
Okay, thank you.
An example, repairing the roofs on this building and the community center are in this amount. If they need to be repaired, it's more than an expense item, so they are capitalized.
This quick conversation here is going to translate into that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Didn't mean to interrupt, just trying to understand.
So as shown, looking at the revenues depicted as the blue line and the operating expenditures, the red line, again, you have the operating surplus. Again, this chart was updated to add the line, the green line, which is operating expenditures plus the capital investment. The proposed budget covers the capital investments you'll see for the first two dots, FY 18 and 19, but our normal revenues are not projected to cover those capital costs going out beyond that. So you'll see basically the $1.6 million imbalance in FY 20. That was the chart from the slide that you asked to pull up. And then if you don't solve that, it grows. So it's 1.6 million from 20 plus 500 added in 21, and then it grows again in 22. So just pictorially, this is what it is. This is what it looks like. I wanted to bring all this up because there will be a surplus when we close the books this year. And it could be over $1.5 million. My recommendation, though, is that any and all surpluses be looked at as one-time monies and not solutions to the projected structural deficit in fiscal year 20, 21, and 22. It's pretty consistent with what Paul's saying, but he's adding the timing of start now versus I'm just saying whatever surpluses we have, I'm suggesting that we not plug those holes and defer tough decisions to find structural solutions to our problem. So one-time money such as surpluses should either be set aside in reserves for a very specific purpose, whatever that purpose may be, but to actually have a stated purpose, or spent on one-time projects. So if we could go ahead and flip to the next slide. So page 3 in your handout is the facilities fund page out of our budget, page 268. So again, at our last council meeting, Mayor Pro Tem was talking about possibly trying to tackle some of this now as opposed to waiting for the strategic plan and new financial policies and a long-term financial plan, but maybe actually taking care of some of our unfunded deferred projects, particularly with our facilities. So this is a laundry list. So as we close this fiscal year that we're in now, we will have a surplus. My suggestion would be that we start tackling some of the deferred maintenance. These are items that were not budgeted for in our historic budgeting methodology, but moving forward when we're looking at updating our financial policies, putting together our long-term financial plan, and actually doing budgets, that we need to have line items in our operating budget that sent money over to this fund to pay for major maintenance on our facilities. So here's a laundry list. I'm not making any recommendations on how to spend this tonight, but we're doing a facilities assessment right now. Public Works and our facilities folks are doing a full facilities assessment that we expect to have done by the end of summer that goes soup to nuts on everything we need done on our facilities and we'll have prioritization and costs associated with them. It just so happens that the timing will be when we're finally closing out all of our books, and we'd normally be bringing our September financial fiscal rollover report. So we may want to time some of this discussion for when we know how much we have in surplus from this year carrying over to the next year that's not spoken for yet, but to actually talk about maybe getting some of this work done. And next slide. The other thing is, so there, on page 276 of the budget, staff's identified based on prior discussions, community and budget discussions and so forth. There's a list of hopes and dreams out there that aren't funded. These types of projects would typically get funded when we roll over a surplus, and the council would discuss what might get funded. Town center plan was something that showed up on this list that was in the budget back in, I want to say 2004 or 5, without a dollar amount, and then slowly a dollar amount was put on it, but it ended up getting pulled off of this list and funded, along with a host of other projects. So new stuff basically would go onto this list. So in addition to the facilities list of deferred maintenance that we should be considering, the council might also want to consider spending one-time money on new, neat stuff. And again, not plugging the hole in our structural, that we're projecting is structurally needed to fund the maintenance of what we already have. So that's my pitch to not solve a structural problem temporarily by using one-time monies. I saw it in the past, in my past life, my previous employment, and it's not a good road to go down to avoid making tough decisions by using, one-time monies that are, gifts, if you will, that nobody had plans for, to solve a problem temporarily. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I've given my little pitch on not using one-time monies for structural solutions. I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to go through the rest of these slides, or did you want to do those at a later time?
If we hit a point here where you're looking for something to talk about, I've got some stuff to talk about, but I'd honestly rather hear from you. If you've got ideas on helping us to set priorities to go back into the budget, we're all ears.
Mr. Tomlinson?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, I guess, is Mayor Pro Tem saying we need to find ways to solve the structural solution sooner than later. And then Mr. Killebrew saying, well, don't use this 1 point some odd $1 million as a way to plug that hole. And instead use that money to spend on some of the deferred maintenance items or some of the other items around here that, like the leaking roofs and some of the other items on that laundry list. So what's the prudent course? I mean, go ahead. I'm just asking clarification questions. So that's positions that I'm being presented with tonight, is those two right there?
That's what I'm hearing too, and I guess I would ask, why is that your recommendation?
I'm not one that likes to put off tough decisions with a convenient solution, because it doesn't get easier to fix things later. I would rather just address them and move on.
Okay, I hear that. I'm just asking, what was your reasoning, just so I understand, with not using the surplus to plug the hole, but rather using it to do the
Well,
maintenance?
there had been some comments made at the Financial Review Committee and during public comments about me providing better estimates to close this fiscal year because the number's going to be better. And I just want to make sure that, yes, the number will be better, but that there's a conscious decision here that we're going to use the money in a prudent manner as opposed to putting off the tough decision by using one-time money over short-term cover a structural problem.
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Killebrew, I think I can show this. I understand what you're saying. Can you put slide 20 back up again, please? And I think we can explain this real quickly. If you look at, hold on, this comes up. If you look in projected 2020, the $1.648 million, if you use one-time monies for that, in 2021, that money's not there now. And we're making the assumption that we're going to make the adjustments structurally, so we still get that 1.648 million carrying over to 2021, and it creates a $391,000 deficit. So if you use one-time funds, all of a sudden now in 2021, I'm up to almost $2 million that I have to make up. So, you know, some of the other authorities I sit on, one of the things we have to look at, and I think Dana Point needs to start looking at this quickly, are unfunded pension liabilities as well. And we have other policies where if we have budget surpluses, half of it will go to capital improvements, the other half will go to paying down unfunded pension liabilities. And that's just another discussion we should have, and that should take place in our strategic planning to set up our priorities. So, you know, I like the idea of trying to do some of these other things. I agree with you 100%. If it's view it as a one-time revenue source, get some other things done, do some of this deferred maintenance, which is desperately needed. But yeah, we can't use that money to try to fix these problems. It'll just compound them down the road.
That, I mean, ultimately in this slide, it shows that the 1.648 is recurring every year thereafter because we fixed the structural problem, and therefore that money is available every year. If you use it once, it's available once. The next year we have that 168 that we don't have available, plus the 391. So as Councilmember Miller said, now where I have a 2 million problem hole because we just pushed it instead of fixing it. So I agree with Mr. Killebrew that we can't just, and if we end up, and as good as he's gotten at projecting and forecasting, those are just forecasts. So when you're trying to get to the end of the year, counting on them to fix a hole, you know, if we get a little bit extra and if we end up with a 1.9 and we can go take some deferred maintenance off and relieve a little pressure further out, hooray for us, you know. But counting on it to fix problems only punts it down the road, so.
I have one quick question to follow up on that. And I should ask this earlier, but Mr. Killebrew, are these revenue projections taking into consideration some of the new hotels that we have in the pipeline?
Partially included in the latter half of 2020. Essentially, I've got two hotels combined about 150 plus rooms, 3+ star, 70% occupancy, coming online fiscal year 2020, and being fully online part of the way through fiscal year 2021. That would generate $750,000, $800,000 a year in new TOT. So that is included in here.
So that is included.
It
So
is
we're
included.
included in that, and we still have 1.648 million.
Yes. But there's
Come up
also, there's 4 other hotels. I was confident enough in looking at where 2 of them are at in the entitlement process to think that they will actually come to fruition. So I was comfortable enough to throw some numbers, and the numbers I put in here are conservative, even for them. It's about 75% of what I think they're actually going to generate.
So the 2 hotels you think will be on in 2020 are in the number, and we still have 1.648 million to come up with. So
Correct. It's
let's
a
say
big,
something. Hold on. My question is: so if something happens and they don't come online, this number could potentially be substantially larger.
It could, and this also assumes that our largest expenditure is growing at 5% per year on out through 2022. That's our sheriff's contract. That had been the historic average over the last 10 years. So if that comes in at a lower clip, then that'll help. Conservative on personnel costs, our second largest expenditure, those are projected out as growing at the historic clip, if you will. I'm not saying that they will, but that's what I've got on my projections. And on the revenue side, I'm more conservative when I get out in those years. I'm not assuming that sales tax is going to be growing at 4 to 4.5%. It's lower, and does not include new restaurants that are going to come online in Town Center. The numbers don't include some of the growth the continued growth above what would be a baseline growth for property tax, but we're going to see some there. So the numbers probably aren't as bad as what they're going to be, but I have to be conservative when I'm getting out beyond, going out 2 years is hard enough to predict. Going out 5 years is a shot in the dark, and I see some cities go out 10 years, and it's pie in the sky stuff that you can't predict.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Tomlinson, did you have?
Questions are answered, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, did you want to start going through the items?
Well, with the agreement of my fellow council members, if we want to sort of leaf through the budgets and just talk about things that we can, pick off, I'm more than willing to sort of work through that. Does that seem like an approach that might be worth our time?
Well, I guess let's put it this way. Are there any objections? Mr. Miller?
I don't have an objection to that. I guess my question is, we're getting ready to go through, and this is to Mr. Killebrew and to all of us, if we're going to if we're going to go through a strategic planning session and our priorities are going to change, that's going to change this budget. And do you anticipate, well, I don't even know how to ask the question. I mean, it's, are we going down through an exercise that in 3 months we go through strategic planning, everything we just did tonight is going to be changed? And does it make sense to try to do that now, or does it make sense to wait till we go through our strategic plan, take the budget we have right now and understand that we can modify that after that we've gone through it, we readjust our priorities, and then start having these discussions about how are we going to come up with this money? Does our strategic plan make sense? And can we even save money with the direction that we're going in, or does it solve a lot of these problems for us? I mean, I'm not opposed to going through this line item by line item right now, but I'm wondering about, what direction are we trying to go in, and that's a conversation that we need to have. Does this make sense to even try to do this right now?
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
So I've thought about that because I have the same, I didn't want to just go out here and pretend to do something, right? It really wasn't going to have a long-term value. So well, one, I'm encouraged that over, the next 6 months, we will work through getting a strategic plan and a forecast, and then we'll start to figure out how to budget to priorities, and hopefully the 2019 half of this budget, we will find some of that real money in a way that's more thoughtful than what we're going to be able to do by a couple of workshops here. So the big hope, at least on my part, is that process will really help us look at priorities,
Right.
what we do, where we spend money on a very programmatic, priority-based value, and help us really be the right way to go back and address this and get back on track. So what we will be able to do in the next couple of budget workshops here at the FRC tomorrow, a final, will be not be as dramatic, if you will, and thoughtful. But if we can even get $200,000 to $300,000 out of here, I mean, all of them count, right? I mean, I'll just look at as an example, our very first item here is the city council.
And it went up 14%.
The city council, on
didn't get a pay raise,
page
did you?
129 of our budget book, for example, has, $103,500 in materials and services.
What page are you on, Mr.?
I'm on 129 of the budget book. Right.
Okay, thank you.
The details are right behind that on 130 and 131.
And in fact, if you go to 131, right, you can see that, for example, we have $25,000 to do a state of the city sponsorship, or $5,000 for other, for example. It's $30,000 that we could decide we just didn't want to spend. if it were worth it. Now, I don't want to take the mayor's State of the City sponsorship away, but we could discuss it with her. She's right here tonight. So anyway, $30,000, if we decided it wasn't the right way to spend money, is $30,000, and we could actually go fix something or do something useful with it, other with it, right? That would have a longer term, potentially have a longer term impact. So those are the kinds of things that I think we're trying to get things that we can decide on that are really sort of in our wheelhouse to make a decision on, and maybe we can trim a little bit here and a little bit there. So it's worth at least trying to wrap our head around.
Well, I'm speaking of the State of the City sponsorship. I'm not even sure what's involved and why it's $25,000, but I could certainly get up and just do some presentation from here if that's what we're looking for, and,
Let's
know.
do a U2 thing where we're on the roof of the city hall and a couple speakers and we get everybody over in the fields.
It might actually go viral. But I mean, something like that is 30% of the 103,000, so, I mean, it's significant for this item, and, I would throw it in for the cause.
So I guess my question procedurally is, how does this work? Do we have to vote on each one of these items that we're looking at removing?
Yeah, that's a good, I was about to say, how would we decide that? Should we vote on an item? And maybe we should. Maybe that's the most straightforward thing we could do. I don't really
Mr.
know.
Munoz?
I mean, you can do whatever you want, and, Mr. Kilbrew was just saying to me that sort of a general consensus on things is probably all we need instead of a formalized vote, but
You-
however you want to handle it.
The actual budget gets adopted at a hearing that's noticed. It will be noticed for June 6th, even though I have every expectation it'll get continued to June 20th. So nods of heads and discussion that sounds like you're in agreement will allow me to make the adjustment in the proposed budget and the numbers I bring back for the hearing itself, and it's at the hearing when you actually vote. So.
Okay, so it sounds like we can just have a consensus, give you that directive, you make adjustments to this proposed budget, and it'll all come back at some point when we're voting on this final.
So just one further question. We didn't have anything budgeted for 2017 for State of the City address?
It kind of got absorbed in other places in the budget, and this was my attempt, as you'll see throughout the budget, to kind of shine a little bit more light on line items or events and things that were actually happening, that I actually put the words in here, State of the City, that.
So I take it that you adjusted the other areas where these
Yes,
had previously come from?
absolutely,
Okay, well,
absolutely.
I guess that's comforting.
Yes, Mr. Vazorek?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking for some clarification as well in the direction that we're going to be giving to the city manager. And I know we're going over line item by line item. I guess I would expect us to basically giving him an idea that he's either going to cut some things or maybe move some money around from one account to another, because I do think it's important that I think we can identify what some of our priorities are now, and if we do want to move some money around. So, I guess we're going to give general head nods what we're doing, but at the end of it, maybe it's, taking it as a whole, because the budget is currently balanced. So, and I agree, we should go over everything with a fine-tooth comb, and we really should scrub it and see if we can find savings. It's never too soon to start. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And, we really should be looking at things to see if they're justified when we are moving in the direction that we're moving. So we are hearing that call, and we're definitely starting now. So I think that's a great idea. So I just want to make sure that when we're giving the head nods in the direction, it's kind of like, this is an area, Mr. Killebrew, that we see some issue with. Can you please come back and maybe rework some stuff? We're not just asking you to take your pencil out and just cross things off necessarily.
Yeah,
you know, just overall, I don't know if that's our goal, is just to go through and knock things out right now, but.
Kind of sounds like it to me that we're knocking things out.
If there are things in here we can knock out, where we look at it and say,
Yeah.
we're all in agreement that can be knocked out, we should, right? In other areas, maybe we won't be that clear.
And what we're, as you're knocking things out, my challenge here and with the department heads is to let you know what we think the impact's gonna be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let you know what?
No, yes.
Okay?
Yeah, we will try to.
I didn't hear
make
that.
sure We'll try to make sure we know what the impact is, or that our staff warns us, if we knock that out, the roof's gonna come in, or,
Oh,
you know,
okay. Yes,
something
thank
like
you. We
that.
would
So we
like
don't
that.
wanna get too carried away. We just wanna actually look at what we believe and get feedback, right? So,
And I think, Mr. Vazorek, yeah, you're right, this is balanced at this point, as we've defined it, but I guess we're trying to knock out things to start chipping away at that $1.6 million.
We are. I just expect that ultimately we are going to be doing this again.
Oh, yes.
And so he's going to be bringing it back. So what
Yes.
we're not necessarily saying this is, you know, this is what we're all going to eventually
Right.
vote on. We're just trying to give some direction to find some savings and scrub everything that we can and determine some of our priorities,
So-
where we
so-
want.
What you've
Exactly.
knocked out then, if, when I bring it back at the hearing, that the state of the city's not in there, it's $25,000 structurally and $50,000 to the bottom line since it's in 2 years.
Right, and the 5,000 other, I'm hearing that.
I didn't see that discussed yet.
So I heard 30. Right, so, I mean, when we come back with something and it's a specific, we can, you know, decide on it at that point, but to have this little, you know, $5,000 other slush fund, I don't know as we need it at this point. All right, catch-all, how's that?
Other.
Other, yes, catch-all.
Clear on what we're doing, can we start talking about some of these things? We have some questions.
Okay, and the FRC's weighing in on this too, so, you know, they'll bring back some recommendations to Mr. Killebrew, he'll bring these recommendations to us, so this is kind of, you know, a
After
moving
hearing
target.
from the FRC and from this body at the last meeting, I actually have a couple slides that encompasses all of the sponsorships and events. The FRC actually asked that we prepare a memo, which we've done.
and in the scheme of things, to Mr. Victoric's question, I believe on the 6th of June, our next council meeting, we would actually take another shot at this, right?
Absolutely.
With some feedback that, between what we get tonight and what the FRC gives us. By the 20th, I guess that would be the council meeting where we would hope to pass it, or approve it. And ultimately, if we believe we need another budget workshop in the middle of there, we should just decide to schedule it, right? So, because we'll have to do our best to get it right as we think we can get it.
Okay, so I'm hearing the 25 and the 5 for those 2 years. We'd like you to take that out, then let us know if there's an impact when you do that.
Any other changes in this budget? So we've also got in here, in that particular line item, 5th Marine Support Group, VFW, and Pet Project Foundation.
Any thoughts?
I don't think I'd be in favor of taking away somebody's Thanksgiving thing for 5,000, nor taking away the VFW annual support for
Yeah,
10,000.
Okay.
That's not, I don't like
That
that.
goes towards priorities of
Right.
this community, that those are important things for us.
Yeah, so I think we're all
I agree with
in
those. I
agreement
think
on
we
that
don't
one.
wanna-
So I got a quick question.
Sure.
I guess I'm moving on, but this is one that I've been looking at, and it's been bugging the crap out of me, quite frankly.
Wait a minute, where are you?
I'm on page.
Because
two-
we're going to go systematically through all
If
this.
he wants to go, well, let him.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I don't mind.
All right, I can wait, but
Okay.
let me ask, because this has been bugging the crap out of me.
All right, go ahead.
It's been grinding on me
I
today.
certainly don't want to bug you.
And this is out of Community Services. It's on page 224. Under Professional Services, it says Contract Classes, Split Instructor City, and it's $180,000 a year. What is that?
Our recreation classes, let me actually get on the page. It says 220.
224.
Our recreation classes, we charge for them. And it's pretty much standard in Parks and Rec, not just in Orange County or California, but across the nation, that the gross revenue is split with the instructor that provides the classes. These are all contract instructors. Our split is 70-30. City keeps 30, and that helps to offset the cost of any facilities that are used, but also the registration systems themselves and handling,
So these are the instructors for all of our community services classes?
yes.
And so do we show that revenue somewhere?
Yes, recreation is in our revenues.
Maybe somebody can answer, I mean,
So, but it doesn't, to me, so does it show it as a gross revenue?
Yes.
Okay, so, all right, okay.
maybe Mr. Denny can answer this question for me. How many participants do we have through these programs? How many people are we serving in our community? And I'm saying it's a benefit to them because it's a lower priced and the city's sponsoring some of that.
This is fully funded through those fees, correct?
Yes.
We have 504 classes with 3,800 people that participate in those classes.
Okay, thank you.
So, but basically, to our bottom line, it's just, we're passing through cash.
Yes.
Okay.
Look,
Thanks, I
You
would
good?
bug it. I was like, what?
You know,
Okay.
you've got a long enough discussion tonight already, but I think this is worthwhile of a comment. Before any of you were on this council, we were audited by the IRS, which basically came to the conclusion that we couldn't do what we're doing, that we had to hire all of those instructors as employees. The financial impact would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars and would have basically made it something we couldn't do. So a couple councils ago, the city invested in fighting that audit and went to federal court and won against the IRS to where we can continue to do that. And so it's a benefit that you've already done something to in the past that helps with that line item.
An example of litigation that cost us $140,000, but the payback was a little over 2 years by not having to convert them. And there's another city in LA County that folded, and I actually just got a call from them, from their city manager and finance director 2 weeks ago, asking how we did it. And I told them, it's too late, you already changed how you do it, you can't go back under federal tax codes. So they don't have much of a recreation class program now.
Okay.
Let's move forward, guys.
All right.
Okay.
So where are you now?
Okay, so I am on page 135. So in the city manager's budget, at least here, right, this particular item under professional services, we've added $55,000 to do our strategic plan things, but there's a $24,000 line item for federal legislative advocate. That's one of those I'd like to determine what our value there is.
This is a advocacy contract, I think is the terminology we're using now, lobbyist in Washington DC, that the city has had in its budget since before I got here, 10 years. It had been way back in the budget in the Water Quality Department 57. I moved it here so that we could have a discussion about lobbyists in general. The city manager's budget had, as you see in the prior years, money for a coastal commission advocate and a state advocate, if you will, that I'm proposing to eliminate those two, but I wanted to bring to light the federal legislative advocacy contract that we do have in place, $2,000 a month retainer. And the big project that we have that we can foresee in wanting to keep this firm on Vanscoic is essentially the post office site, with the hopes that we can get some movement there as far as having some options in the future to possibly make use of the post office site that's more consistent with the city's town center hopes and dreams.
I discussed this with Mr. Denny some couple of months ago in terms of whether that was a good expense. I'm not sure. I'm a big advocate of trying to figure out if something could change at the post office. So I just wanted to make sure that we knew that it was worth spending the money for another year or not. I think at that time, before we looked at the budget and realized we thought maybe one more year would make sense. I don't know where we are or whether it does or
And-
not,
and
but
there
I
have
thought it's
been-
worth discussing.
There had been other uses in the past that I don't foresee them coming to fruition with the current makeup of politics in Washington, but they helped us with identifying potential grant monies and earmarks. I know they did some work, assistance with some of the stuff down in the harbor, so with the Army Corps of Engineers. But there might be things that come up at the federal level, but I don't, what we foresee in the next year might be some help with the post office.
And how long have we been paying this $24,000 for the post office?
I think Mike said it was before his time at the city, so 2000, 2000?
And our progress has been,
It wasn't just the post office. The post office just happens to be the issue that's relevant right now, so.
could we not come back with an actual contract when there's some use for it, or some scope of work where we actually think it may happen, as opposed to 24,000 for some hopes and dreams?
Absolutely, and we actually looked at canceling the contract earlier this year, but we held back on that until we got a little more information from them about what the process would be for trying to transition the post office, and we're looking for council direction on whether or not that particular project was going to be a priority moving forward. And if it was, then having somebody physically located in Washington could be helpful to us as we look at that project. But if that's not something that this council is going to make as a priority in the short term, then it may make sense to go ahead and cancel that contract now.
Well, for me, I'd like to see something more specific and what, why we have some belief that it's going to actually net something, rather than just keep throwing $24,000 into something and we have no metrics to determine that we're using our money wisely. Go ahead.
Mr. Denny, could I ask if we, or Mr. Killebrew, if we actually get some traction on the post office where there's an opportunity? I mean, we have general guidelines on what it would take for us to do something there now. But if we decided that we had a real opportunity and some potential funding to do something, and we went back to work with these, would it be a difficult problem for us to actually put them under contract to help us with this particular project?
Doubtful. I'm sure they would always want to be helpful to us whenever we're
So I
we're
would
ready.
say that if we get a budget together to go do something, then we include this in the budget. And meanwhile, we shouldn't spend it until we're at that point. We've gotten the preliminary work we need to know where to start from them, I believe, from what you've sent me. And so,
Okay, so,
And
do you
just,
have any nods? I guess that's the
Yeah.
question.
nodding? Okay,
I'm seeing the
All right.
nods, just to point out, though, this $24,000 will be available to the bottom line, but is not a structural solution, because I didn't have it in the second fiscal year here, and it's not in my projections.
Okay.
okay,
But it is $24,000.
yes. 24 here, 24 there. All right, yeah.
All right, so if we're going basic page by page, I'd like to go to page 140.
140, sure.
And I'm looking at, under professional services again, the GASB 6875 OPEB consultant. Why do we need that?
So that we're compliant with our annual financial reporting. It's an audit requirement.
So it's a requirement of our audit that we have.
We have to produce information for our post-employment benefits, which is essentially, it's work that CalPERS doesn't do for us, that we have to do additional work in order to meet minimum
It's not
reporting
something we
requirements.
can do internally?
We actually had been doing it internally, but it's gotten so complicated with the implementation of new accounting standards that we've contracted for it.
Mr. Vazorek?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you answer really quickly why the price jumped so much
Oh.
from FY18 to 19?
Bev is our accounting supervisor, and
Yeah.
every other year, there's additional work that has to be done. This is work that's actually done by an actuary and not by an accountant.
Because it's going from 2,500
It's every other year.
to 14,000.
We would expect it to go back down in 2019.
2 and then 14.
20, I
2
should say.
Yes.
Okay, well, and then still in that same thing, this is kind of small, but Bank of America banking services fee, I mean, what are they charging us for that? How much money do we have in there? I don't get charged a service fee from Bank of America for my banking. I mean, it's $8,000 a year. I mean, that's a pretty substantial fee.
And we run a lot of transactions through Bank of America.
It's probably some sort of analysis where they charge you
There's
for certain
account analysis
transactions.
in there, there's a host of services that we rely on with them. Positive pay with our checking account, or we register checks in case somebody tries to bring in a fake check, they won't cash it, so.
Okay, I just wondered, it was eight grand. I was like, it seems like a lot when most banks will do it for nothing, but, okay.
Well, then you go
We-
down a little further, and it's Bank of America Merchant Service credit cards, 19,000 a year.
We're not allowed to pass on the cost of credit card transactions.
It's a 3%, right?
We actually have a lower percent, but yeah, it's a negotiated rate. So when we accept credit cards for payment as a convenience to our customers, there is a cost to it.
Okay, and we can't charge that.
Is that a
Not allowed
legal
to have
issue?
We're not allowed to have a separate cost charged in our fee structures to get reimbursed. It's
So is that a policy?
Visa.
or
No, it's
is that a legal
Visa,
issue?
Visa won't allow us to charge it and still
Excuse me?
accept. Visa will not allow us to accept payment and charge for it separately. We can build it into our fee structure, but we can't charge separately for it.
Okay.
Do we build it into our fee structure then?
We started taking credit cards several years ago. The city did not used to take them, but we had so many folks in town that want to use their credit cards when they're making payments that it was a convenience.
Okay.
And we cannot pass that cost along.
So, okay, but I guess this goes into our fee study program as well, but, we have discussions about this all over the county about credit card fees because they become substantial
Yes, they do.
to an agency, and $19,000 a year.
I'm not going to accept we won't accept a Visa payment for a $100,000 payment for a building.
But you can't buy a
permit.
car on a VC either, so they won't let you do it for the same reason. But, yeah, I think that's something we need to take a look at. I mean, if we're doing a fee study anyway, maybe that's something that they look at for.
One quick question, Madam Mayor. Can you think of any way to reduce that, Mr. Killebrew? Other than not using or not accepting credit cards, or wonder how we can possibly.
I'm going to ask staff to do and since we're looking at a $19,000 line item, I'm going to ask staff to look at see if we can get a report that shows the payments, and maybe if we limited the top-end dollar amount, that might carve out some of this.
Okay, thank you.
I guess the question is, and I don't really know if I've gotten an answer that really explains it to me. Why, when it's a fee that we have to pay, is that not passed right through to whoever the customer is?
We can't do it, but for instance, with our recreation program, we run our online system through a third-party vendor. They collect the fee and they can charge it. We can't.
I don't think we're getting any answers
Yeah, I
tonight,
know.
so why don't we just let it?
We can move on with it,
we can
because
move on.
we've been spinning round and round and round over fire on this as well when they get their permits, but,
So we look at fees and
yeah.
stuff,
It's been this way for years. I had it in Long Beach with our multi-billion-dollar collections and the council wanting to actually accept credit cards, and then when the price tag came back, it was we ended up putting a pretty low threshold, but we started accepting them, but not for items, I think it was over $1,000.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Next.
If we could look at page 145. We added for these 2 years a public information contract service, $400,000 each of the years. We've discussed it before, but we should really think through that so we have a common understanding. So, Mr. Kelbrew, could you give us some background?
So I actually have a slide, and it was on one of my slides, but I'm just going to read my notes that I took. As we all know, particularly social media, it's become much more active. The venues are changing as far as the platforms that are being used. Nextdoor came about in the last year plus and is now very popular in Dana Point in particular. I feel like we have a requirement to make an investment in professionally managing our public information efforts. I think a lot of what we've seen in this community, the divisiveness, has come because some of it could have been avoided had we done a better job communicating. Too often we're playing catch-up to public discussions that unfortunately are not always fact-based. We're held accountable for the accuracy of the information. We hear back when our information isn't accurate. But there's a lot of individuals out there that are sharing their thoughts and opinions through social media that's affecting public perceptions, and that those same standards of accountability aren't always evident. I think that proactively engaging our constituents by providing fact-based discussions is critical to providing the best possible forum for public decisions that the city must make. But I believe this council, from individual discussions, and I know the staff believe we need to make a more comprehensive we need to have a more comprehensive public information presence, and to create, where possible, some structured platforms for those discussions regarding city priorities, programs, and projects. The proposed budget does anticipate a monthly retainer of about $7,500, and there's $10,000 in there for ancillary costs. No consultant has been identified, and if the budget is approved, staff would engage the council in making the decision on how best to move forward, both scope of work and selection of contract consultant to assist us in this arena. I've got a perfect example that unexpectedly Russ teed up, the lieutenant teed up last week at the coffee chat in regards to some social media posts and a 911 call. We've got a couple minutes if you guys want to hear what he did last week. The feedback I've been getting was, not only kudos to Russ, but, pointing out the obvious when it comes to the accuracy of what's getting posted in social media and kind of the warning, if you will, of believing everything you read. So if you're interested, I know Russ is ready to go with a quick little update of what he did last Friday at the coffee chat.
Well, it's probably going to take a couple minutes, Mike, more than a couple minutes, but this is a real challenge for us in today's world. I went and spoke at the Dana Point Civic Association last Friday morning, and this was brought to my attention the day prior. Okay, and it really speaks to the accuracy of information. So this is a post from Nextdoor. Okay, we're all familiar with the application Nextdoor, and I'm going to read you the post from a woman sharing her experience in the harbor. And then we're going to kind of work through this, okay? So I'm going to read this. It's titled, "Man Kills Bird at Harbor." Yesterday on my morning walk, I was passing by the coffee importers at the Dana Point Harbor when a deranged-looking man walked by me with an injured crow in his hands. It was such a bizarre sight, I didn't have time to react as he stood over the rail and threw the poor thing down on the concrete and water below with force. He then stared everyone down and paced the sidewalk, dozens of crows flying above him and cawing loudly. I looked down and watched the poor bird try to claw his way out of the water and then drown. It was horrifying, to say the least. I did call the police, but they couldn't locate the coffee shop on the harbor because there are many businesses that serve coffee. I found that to be a little strange because there's only one coffee shop in the harbor. No. In any event, as far as I know, they never caught him. On my way back from the walk, about 45 minutes later, he streamed past me on the sidewalk. A guy behind him told me that he had just pushed him and his friend off the sidewalk, saying, "Get out of my way." Was he on to the police finally showing up? It was very frustrating not being able to stop him. He obviously was sick in the head and a nuisance to society at the very least. For the record, if you see him, avoid him. He was wearing all black, a black hoodie with a skull on the back, and a black headband around his head. He looked to be late 20s, early 30s, thin, about 5'7", and either had a leather dark tan or was Hispanic, more Peruvian in looks. Just thought I'd let you know. I have reported this information to the police. So when you look at that initial post, how does that make you feel about your police department? Unresponsive? Okay. Now I'm going to go through the thread here. The sheriff couldn't identify the coffee importers? One of Dana Point's oldest businesses in town? That alone is the most disturbing. What if the suspect was hurting a human? That alone should be pointed out to the city, dispatch, etc.
So the thread is other people chiming in
Right,
on the
this is
initial
now
post.
other people chiming in. I don't get down to those areas often, but it sounds like our safety is being ignored by the authorities. They didn't know where Coffee Importers is located? Really? Not long ago, sitting at the light of Del Obispo and PCH heading to the harbor, a man obviously drunk harassed me in the car and spit on my window. Luckily, I got it rolled up before he got to me. It's a difficult situation, but there was a time when authorities took immediate action towards vagrants. And yeah, Dana Point cops do not like to show up to calls, but they will harass skateboarders and homeless people. It goes on and on and on, but really, I mean, how does it make you feel about your police department? So, let me try and I'm going to play a little segment here. Now, this is the woman who called, and she's talking to one of our call takers. And we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the initial post. Let me see if I can get this working here. Of course, it never works when you want it to. Anyway, since we're pressed for time, but anyways, the dispatch, the woman calls and she immediately says, "This occurred 15 minutes ago." That's the first things out of her mouth. Priority 1, crime in progress. Priority 3. But when you read the initial post, it sounds like she is witnessing this bird being killed and that the police don't know where it's at or what's going on. It goes further on to say, you know, they're trying to get the location. She goes, the coffee shop in the harbor. and she gives the location of Dana Point Harbor Drive and Golden Lantern. Well, come on, everyone knows it's the coffee importers, right? RJ's, the Brig, Proud Mary's. So all this information that the readers on this post don't have, okay? So this would not have come to my attention if it wasn't for Sergeant Himmel. So he monitors this every day now. Because had this not been addressed, had we not interjected the facts, what happens over time is people begin to build a perception of their police department. Not on facts, but on their perceived facts, or the facts as they see it. And I don't think the intent of this woman was to, bash the police department, but it really speaks to how we all jump on the thread and begin to comment on issues that we don't have all the facts on. And it goes on and on. Sergeant Himmel interjects, and he starts pushing out the facts. He starts talking about, well, why couldn't you place them on a 5150 hold? And he explains about 5150 and the criteria. And, then someone here apologizes. I apologize for my ignorance about how 5150, and someone, thank you, Dana Point Police Services, for clarifying what it actually is and how it is applied. So for law enforcement, this is getting up there just as important as someone on the street. Because not only can it damage a community, damage a police department, and I mean, when you look at the events of last year, social media can literally burn a town down. So it is very important. Interestingly enough, for those of us who subscribe to National Geographic, on the cover here, Why We Lie, the Science Behind Our Complicated Relationship with the Truth. Very interesting article. But what really grabbed me was Susan Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of National Geographic. And this is what she says. What's even scarier in this digital era is how errors of fact proliferate instantly, and that so many people embrace the alternate realities. The trust gap between the public and experts, after widening for decades, is now a chasm. And as certified experts decline in stature, self-declared experts ascend. And that's really what we're dealing with. Very important in today's world to manage that message, get in front of it.
So what I hear is the police did that in a couple of postings, and it was taken care of, and we don't even know what kind of audience we're talking about. I mean, we're talking $100,000.
What this is being done by is a position that costs us $300,000 a year in a sergeant, or $260,000 in a deputy. And it's not just the police department. It goes beyond that. It goes to communicating out Doheny Village Plan information, whatever's evolving with the city, to be able to have somebody who's schooled in this profession, monitoring our day-to-day stuff, and for staff and council to reach out to push the messages out, to push the information out. We've been doing it we started doing it back in November, and we've got an assistant administrative analyst that's helping to push messages out through some of the social media. I know Russ has a crime prevention specialist and now a sergeant, and we're learning how to use these things, but we're taking staff off of their normal duties, if you will, and trying to craft a program here that if you look across most other cities and most businesses, to be honest. They've got professionals that are doing this. We're not recommending at this point in time that we actually have a staff person to do this, but we kind of lead off with a contract at this point in time, and that we work together to put together the scope of work and actually make that selection.
But that person who's the consultant would have to spend time talking to the police to get all that information anyway.
Well,
So
when it comes
it's
to.
not like we're saving,
No, Madam
no
Mayor,
time.
it's not about the police department. I have a team in place to handle my social media. This is really about the city of Dana Point and the issues on the horizon and getting the proper information out. It's important to be consistent and be on top of it at all times. You know, I am confident that, you know, the work that Jill Jackson and Sergeant Rich Himmel do, albeit I would rather have them on the street, but I know it is very important to get the correct information out there, because I think everyone deserves the facts. I think as leaders in a community, and I think as residents, if they want to make a decision on an issue, we need to get the facts out there.
Well,
And
I
it's
would
very difficult in
just-
the age of social media. If you're not on top of it, you're behind the curve.
okay, well, my recommendation is we either determine that we want this out or move on, and if you have a specific contract you want to bring to us at some point, we can make that decision. So what are your thoughts?
You know, I think, I'm actually in favor of this, because to me, it seems like more of a placeholder right now. We don't know what this is going to cost until we go out and take a look at it. But I think the city has needed a social media strategy for years. And I think what this is it's going to take some money to set it up. I mean, our webpage is not the easiest webpage to navigate. And we need to have somebody that really understands how to make our digital world work for us instead of us struggling to get through it. And there are firms out there that do this for a living that'll make searching our page easier, make the front page more user-friendly, get out there and have clicks. So it's one-stop shopping for our customer, which is our resident or anybody who wants to take a look at Dana Point. How do I get to that web page? Are there social media issues? How do I get to that? What are their social media accounts? What's happening? I think this needs to be investigated and determine what do we really want and what's our strategy on it. But I think this goes down to our priority list again. When we start talking about strategic planning, is this a priority for this council and this community? I feel it is, and I think we need to leave it in there as a placeholder. There's no guarantee we're going to spend $100,000 a year on it. That does sound kind of excessive to me, but who knows until we get somebody in here to really tell us this is what it would take to build a system like that. So I think it's a good thing.
All right, do we have any other thoughts about this? Yes,
Yes,
Mr.
Madam Mayor,
Resort?
just really quickly to echo that. I support leaving it in for now. The number 100,000 obviously seems very high. If we're going to give some direction, I mean, it's just a number on a piece of paper right now. I mean, to find out, can we do it for less? The answer is no. Justify why it's at that level. But just to say, I do agree that in terms of priorities, I mean, I view this as an issue of transparency, and I think we're all, placing that as a priority. So I wouldn't be in favor of eliminating that, especially if we are going to place a priority on transparency and getting information out to the public. So I definitely think this is something we need to pursue. Do we have to just sign off on it being 100,000 as it is? No, but again, that's just something, we're just giving direction now to take a look at that. Thank you,
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Sure. Mr.
I agree,
Tomlinson?
Madam Mayor, with Councilman Miller and Councilman Vixart.
Good. So are we ready to move on then?
Ready to move on.
Good. Move on.
The city clerk is the next department. I don't actually have any. Sorry, city clerk is the next department. I don't actually have any items. Does anybody?
Yeah, I've got no, not a clerk.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Jim Petty.
Okay.
And then planning is the next one after that. Reading in on, page 153. or so, or 152 and 53?
150, what?
150, 152, 153 is the, entry level to that. 156, the bottom line, I guess.
You guys have anything?
Okay.
It looks like there's, basically $77,000, I think I have that right, of that for the Doheny Village various tasks. Of $65,000 for that, I guess, in that budget too, we should look at. Where we are on that.
Tim, where are you at? What line is that?
I'm looking on page 156 under, at the top, under professional services.
Okay.
To look, I was just running through those line items to see what they were there, that added up to $97,000.
Yeah, we would expect that number to be dropping as we get closer to finishing that plan. Come on.
Okay, do we have any comments, suggestions on this? What are you recommending? Anything?
No, I have a recommended. I'm just sort of looking to find out whether I think there's anything else in there that we ought to delay until we do further, or whether we want to put that budget. I don't know if anybody has an opinion on this, but I'm open to any suggestions. No? Okay, we should. Okay, building, next department.
You guys have anything?
Do you have anything on that?
I don't.
Oh,
Code enforcement.
I have something.
okay,
Just a question.
okay. What page are we on?
65, under operating supplies,
Yeah,
short-term rental program tracking system, under use ID 24/7 complaint hotline. We're posing that, is that 35,000? Is that 35,000 years a continual, it's like a service fee to run that program, or what is that?
It's an annual cost. It may be an introductory offer, but we're not overly clear on that. It's fairly new technology. It is used by quite a few cities, though, from Napa to
Right.
Pasadena. But yeah, it's a hosted application with 24/7 hotline support and all the analytics, the internet analytics that go into hunting down people advertising short-term rentals.
So, we haven't gotten back to our short-term rental ordinance, and I think that's going to be a priority for this community to deal with that sooner or later, hopefully sooner. But in the event, and I'm not saying that'll happen, if we decide not to allow short-term rentals in the city, we could still use this to track down people violating that code, correct?
That's correct.
So this is something we would need moving forward anyway. All right, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's important, Joe, or Councilman Miller, because we had a lot of complaints about that, code enforcement not being responsive to that. Now it's going to be potentially a 24-hour deal where somebody can be notified there's a problem. So I'm in favor of that.
One other question about it, Mr. Killebrew. So how fast, and I guess it's going to be on us because we're going to have to staff the enforcement people, but if it's a 24/7 hotline, how fast do they get those? Because as I understand, it's being monitored by a service, correct? And so
is
how
being-
fast do they get those issues to us?
Information's available to us immediately if we're checking for it. I'm not sure if there's a push technology. Basically, if there's an issue that's severe enough, the direction's going to be call the sheriff's department. But more important for us for code enforcement is actually tracking the complaints so that we can.
And so, and I don't remember seeing that in there. It kind of goes a little bit more into, can it automatically create a ticket to go out there and investigate,
Yes, we'll get detailed reports on all the calls that are made.
and it keeps,
And detailed reports on all the identified, potentially identified, operators that aren't permitted.
right. And so I guess it's going to dovetail into this, and I know it's not in there now, but right into our planning department, are we looking at systems to put plan, check, review, the progress, everything online, so our customers who come in, because it's kind of going down that path with code enforcement, and are there other systems that we're looking at to make, basically automate permit applications and things like that, so we can actually track and see where we are?
We already have some of that technology available, as far as online, applications and so forth, so not. It's going that way. We've been investing in the technology with the products we use as they evolve.
Right, and so if you have somebody who's made a complaint against a project that's going on, they can actually see where that complaint is, where it is in the queue, when they're going to get to it, or for somebody, requested a building inspector to show up, and they're just waiting to see where they're going to be, and we can kind of show where they are. And
We are in the midst of implementing it's integrated voice response, but it's a fancy word where people can actually schedule their inspections online. We don't right now. What we get is calls in and voicemails, and we have somebody come in early in the morning and puts together the inspection schedules, where we're able to automate those with the systems we're implementing right now.
Okay.
On code enforcement, with our CMMS system that Mark and Mike are working on for our facilities, there's a work order component that is also going to have an app that's available for people to report not only issues out in the community for potholes or graffiti, but code enforcement issues as well. And it will be the front end that captures the information, that sets up the workloads, that also allows us to track assignments and progress. Where right now that's all done in file systems, and you have to go ask a code enforcement officer.
Okay.
Where is this particular item at?
All right, I guess I kind of diverged a little bit off what that system was, but thanks for the update.
Should we move on?
Please.
On economic development, I don't have any suggestions here. Anybody? Oh, sorry, on economic development, I don't have any particular line items here, but is anybody here and looking at that have something that jumps out? Okay. Public Works Administration is next. Move on.
Move on.
Street maintenance.
Yeah, I have question there. Okay, so we have a street maintenance program to keep us at a specific level, right, of our streets? And what is what's the possibility of having a different level of our streets, so that instead of every 7 years, we're every 8 years, whereas that may be a significant cost reduction without compromising, the quality of our streets right now? What page are you on? I'm just speaking generally, 182 street
182.
maintenance, 2350.
2350.
Here now we're talking a big number, something we could actually fill the 1.6 million hole with. And, I love our streets. I want them to be great, but, can we possibly balance the cost of maintaining them at A++ and go to A-?
Two components to that. The bigger part that affects the life of the streets is actually in our CIP program. That's part of the $2.6 million proposed in the budget to transfer into the capital improvement fund.
Okay,
And that would be, we're talking about the life of a street, slurry seals, and what's known as fog seals. So one's residential and the other's arterial. So we've actually recommended increasing our efforts over the next 2 years on those two major projects, simply to extend the life of our street system so that we will have some more flexibility over the next 5 to 10 years in funding our street program, given that we're looking at, some challenges with the budget. In this, what you see here is the operating budget. This is day-to-day maintenance. This isn't, this is going to be crack sealing. So if you see a street cracking out there, you want to be on top of that, because cracks in streets are bad for the longevity of the street. This is painting the red curbs and the crosswalks, and for liability purposes, you want to make sure that you're staying on top of that program. Mark, if I'm missing something, feel free to jump in here, but this is our day-to-day stuff. We've got a crew from the county that we contract with to be on scene on a daily basis doing work. So can we lower the scope of the work? I think our recommendation is this scope of work is probably appropriate, given what the expectations are in this community, and particularly on some of these items, avoiding or minimizing risk.
okay, so here's my frustration. We're trying to find $1.6 million, and so far we've come up with, what, 25,000? I mean, we have to be looking at things that actually we can do something about, that are going to make a difference in the hole in our budget.
Well, let me give you an example in here of something that I know Councilmember Miller brought up at the last meeting, which was we have a $75,000 contract with a landscape maintenance company that cleans up the I-5 off-ramp from Beach City's off-ramp from the freeway to San Juan Creek. That's the section of highway above the bus yard that brings you off the freeway. We have the city wasn't happy with the condition of how Caltrans maintained that with litter and weeds and so forth. And we went to Caltrans, I believe it was about 8 years ago, and said, can you improve or increase the frequency with which you clean up this area? And they said, it's already better than what is seen in a lot of other areas, and they weren't interested in it. So we said, can we get a memorandum of understanding, an MOU with you, and we'll do it. So we added that to our budget, $75,000 a year, and we send a crew out there to clean up that section of highway. So $75,000 in here is certainly, I don't know if you would say it's nice to have, but it could be nice to have when you're looking at finding savings, and it's $75,000 a year.
Well, I know I've driven on a lot of streets in my day, and ours are magnificent. I completely agree. But I would like to know from staff if there is some level below where we are that we could actually still maintain streets in good condition and, be able to actually start making a dent in our $1.6 million.
You'll be getting a much more detailed report about the current condition of our street and the future condition of our street as a part of your agenda for June 6th. We just got the reports in on our facility condition report for all of our streets, where we scored an 84 out of 100, down 2 points from 2 years ago where we were at 86 out of 100. And it lays out for you what it looks like. The challenge is, as the streets get worse, they get much more expensive. And so it's a question for your city council to address, and if you choose to do that, certainly you can. You will pay for it later. So it's a pay now or pay later. When you pay later, it will be more expensive.
And do we have any comparisons to other cities and their streets and where they fall, so we can, go look at their streets and drive on their streets and see, an 84
Certainly. If you
doesn't
want to
really
see the
mean much
highest
to me,
rated
and-
streets in the county, you'll go to Mission Viejo. if you want to see the lowest rated streets in the county, you probably go to Santa Ana, Buena Park, or Stanton.
Well, I would like in the report then to see, okay, here's a San Clemente or whatever, and here's what an 82 is, here's what an 80 is, so we could actually get some metrics as to what we're talking about.
Happy to do
And
that.
how much, if we went to one of those levels, we're talking about in terms of savings for our streets.
As we're recommending in the budget, these assessments get folded into the discussion on financial policies. That my thought is to actually ask the council, what grade do you want us to maintain? And then look at Public Works to produce a work plan over the 30-year life of 25 to 30-year life of all of our streets, and say, how much annual investment do we need to maintain this council-selected grade?
Right,
Like you
but-
said, right now, we're second highest in the county, I believe, at 84, second or third. And you might want to select an 80. So with their assessment, my thought is we're going to get something. If you want to maintain an 84, this is the annual investment. If you want to drop it down to an 80, what does it mean physically? But what is the dollar? What do the dollars look
Right,
like?
I'd like all that, and then, where can I go to see what a 80 is and a 78, so that, these numbers in isolation don't really mean anything to me, so that would be helpful.
Great.
Thanks.
Happy to do it.
I agree. I do want to sort of caution that I don't want to do deferred maintenance. That is, I don't want to let them deteriorate now and have to pay more later. So we have to understand
Sure.
the long-term costs. That is the steady state cost too. So yeah, and I don't know the answer. I'm
I
just
don't
trying
either.
to.
I just feel there must be something between perfection and the streets rotting away, and maybe something in between that is acceptable, and
Yeah.
if we looked at other cities and what their streets were like, I would get a better idea of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do know that. I mean, just again, the deferred maintenance is one of those short-term fixes that many cities use, not just us. Certainly, we've done a better job, and therefore, the cost of letting them, quote, rot away may be really high, and I don't want to do that. But anyway,
Don't
we
wanna
need to
do
know.
that.
I agree with your idea, but I do have a more interesting question, at least to me, on that page. 182, at the very top of the page, there's $230,000 in that essentially deals with a banner and special events related things. And one of the areas that we're looking to do is maybe reduce some of the special events or spending. But I saw, first of all, that the cost of putting the banners up jumped up 60. Was that just to transfer the money from one department to another, or was that an actual increase?
That was an actual increase from the prior 2 years. From 2 years ago when we established the budget, after that budget was established, there was a desire to increase the amount of banners, particularly in Doheny Village and Capo Beach. So those got expanded. That's a big part of this increase. And then just taking care of the larger number of banners. We've got replacements. Our banner program was also expanded.
Holiday decorations.
I should say holiday decorations, sorry. It's banner and holiday decorations, but
Yeah.
we've added both the last couple of years, so.
With the possibility, which we haven't gotten to yet, of reducing some of the special events, will that have an impact on our banner or our traffic control for special events? We haven't agreed. I mean, there is a recommendation in here that we do.
To the
Some
extent
reduction.
that there's banners, traffic control, and even police services overtime associated with the events, if you eliminate events, we'll see savings.
Oh, okay.
Where are all those events?
Well, the events are under community.
There's a slide in my
Something in the
presentation
back,
that
yeah.
has all the events.
A little further. Okay. Okay, well, maybe when we look at events, we can come back and revisit to see if there's any savings on banners or whatever. $230,000 to do that is something at least worth looking at. Okay, traffic engineering up next. We're not as far from the end as it looks, though, even though there are some fat sections here, so anyway. Sorry. Got Any suggestions? Okay. Solid waste and recycling. I doubt it, but
Yeah, this is the one that, I think this falls under our franchise agreements, and we were gonna have, I think, financial review or somebody take a look at all of our franchise agreements, how they work, and if there's any way to expand any of the revenue out of there, or actually get them to start sponsoring some of these events, so it comes out of ours, but, I mean, I think that's a good place for them to start and bring it back to us.
I agree with Councilmember Miller.
I think we want to be looking at a lot of our contracts, don't you think?
Well, I'm
Some
just
of
saying,
them
this
that
is, right now, I'm just saying, that under this item, this is
Okay.
franchise, that we have like 3 or 4 different franchise agreements in the city, and these are good places to look at, how do they work, and how can we actually maybe generate additional revenue?
That's a great idea, Councilmember Miller.
yep. And then engineering under Public Works is next, and if anybody has any items, we should.
Okay, I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, water quality,
I like cleaner water. Just like clean water. We should be able to bottle it right out of the creek.
okay.
Sure.
Okay, police services, we can skip that section, I think, this time. Oh. And, let's see, where are we? Yeah.
I guess, Mr. Killebrew, were these, looks like these must have been in some other budget form in 16 and 17?
What page?
214, 215,
Okay,
I guess. Some of these line items in here under materials and services must have been budgeted somewhere else.
No, they were budgeted here, you're just seeing the bottom line.
Oh, you
on-
just broke them out.
Yeah.
You broke them out a little more. Okay, thank you.
So we have to, we're actually budgeting to replace our generator instead of repairing it in 2018? Bottom of 214?
It's on our list of, that I showed you earlier for all the facilities things. It's a high priority on that list. It's not funded. And
So are
Mike's
we having a problem, are we having a problem with that generator?
it's beyond its useful life. Still works, but, yeah.
Well, can we sell it? Sell it
For
and
scrap?
offset the cost of a new one? I mean,
It's that pile, it's that
I don't know.
box that's out in the corner of the parking lot. There may be some money there, but
That's an interesting question about selling it. I don't have an answer for you there. There is, at some point, we're going to reach a balance where we can continue to put money into maintaining it and keeping it running in reliable condition, or are we going to be putting more,
No,
throwing good money after bad?
I understand that, but, you know, a lot of times when you have a capital investment like that, some people can use it for a use not intended like we are for emergency services. They can use it for other reasons that they may need it, and it may have some value to them that could offset the
I
cost of
suspect
us
that
buying a new
it
one.
does still hold value in that I can work through Hawthorne Cat
No, I'm
and
just-
see if there's
yeah,
some
just
resale
check
value
on
to
it.
it, for sure.
And it's if there, I mean, it's the same thing, we didn't really talk about it at the beginning, but our vehicle fleet maintenance, where we're looking at going to leasing them instead of owning them, and so we can rotate them out. And same thing at Fire Authority, we look at selling our old fire engines and offsetting the cost of our new ones with that. So-
And it is a capital asset, so we would look to
Yeah.
either surplus that or sort of, one of the possibilities may be to sell it back through the vendor who's going to
Right.
replace it, potentially.
Yeah, just, it's
and
something
see
to
the
look
cost
at
savings
instead of
there.
just saying, that we could offset some of those costs. I know it's not much, but, and it's a one-time expense. I just want.
Okay. The next on 216, 217 is the city attorney. So we've, so we've upped this one over the actual budget for those years, but not over actual expenses, I guess. So trying to predict where we want to be, I guess, in terms of that budget. It was 700,000, I think, for a couple of years, then we jumped it to 9, but our last 2 years has shown we've spent well above the 700, so anyway.
Between the bigger litigation cases that you've seen, we've also been more active, if you will, in following through on code enforcement, prosecutions. There's a whole laundry list of things that we've been fairly active on. And alls I'm doing here in this proposed budget is saying this has kind of been the burn rate the last couple of years, and recognizing it in the budget as opposed to doing budget adjustments, hoping that the number comes down back to what we had seen years prior, so.
I'd like to make a comment about that. A lot of these things that we saw in the mid-year budget adjustment were things that the public had asked us to do, to look at. So, and I've talked to Mr. Munoz about this. Maybe in the future, when we get a request from citizens to do something, that we can get an idea what it's going to cost budgetary-wise before we proceed with it. I think it's a prudent course of action. I mean, we've done a lot of things that the community has wanted us to do, and I think that's appropriate. But I also think we need to look at the cost of when somebody asks us to do something, that we need to investigate that thoroughly and get an estimate before we proceed to do it.
I mean, again, do we want to leave that budget set flat at 700 and manage to it and then adjust as we need to, or do we feel comfortable adding 200,000 each year to the budget, which is what we've done here? I'm just asking.
No, I understand. I think, if you look at the retainers, only 120,000, and the big costs get into the Muni Code violations and prosecutions, and I think that's getting back to what Mr. Tomlinson is saying, is that those are things we ask him to do, or ask the attorney to do, and it might be a better course to say on some of these bigger projects, or maybe the smaller ones, what's the cost benefit to that? Does it make sense to go after that, or it's going to cost us more than it's worth? And I think it's always a good idea to budget closer to what you think it's going to be, instead of trying to do these mid-year adjustments. And I don't have a problem. I'd like to see it closer to 700,000, but we have things going on in the city that maybe it just won't be, or maybe it will be. Maybe we'll be over or under budget on this one and have a one-time surplus. So.
But I think it's prudent for us to look at those when the community asks us to do something. Okay, what is the cost associated with that? And I think we've kind of just gone along and said, okay, let's do that, without really looking at the budget ramifications. And we get a $360,000 adjustment mid-year, and everybody's like, wow, where do we spend that money? So I think if we look at it case by case, not case by case, but, topic by topic, I think we have a better chance of controlling our expenses.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we do want to try to monitor them, right? Which I guess in terms of being able to do that, if we approve 900,000, will we start to monitor when we get to 600, or versus approving 700 and monitoring when we get to 350 or whatever? I mean, I don't know which makes it easier for us to realize that the headroom's shrinking a lot faster than predicted. But I'm just asking for thoughts here.
Well, I look at it from a perspective of, when we start looking at the larger numbers, we have it broken down. We could keep track of, okay, get a quarterly, how much have we spent on Muni Code violations, and we can see that.
Yeah.
Or
No.
general legal services, non-litigation, what was that for? And how close are we to that, and what are we expecting going forward? Would that be a problem to do quarterly reporting on how we are against these numbers?
Well, one of the things that we do every month is we keep track of our expenses based on different categories. So things that we do that are uniquely for instance, the Community Development Department, they get an invoice that's just for them. Things for the Public Works Department, they get an invoice. Code Enforcement gets its own invoice. The City Prosecution Work gets its own invoice. Whenever we have a unique litigation, we have invoices for that. The prosecution cases are all kind of lumped together, so that's litigation, but it's not pulled apart. But in any event, what we could easily do is provide you with that breakdown on a monthly basis, and it would help you monitor. And if you're getting concerned that maybe we're getting out of whack in some area, then we can talk about it. Part of the problem that we have, in my office from a budgeting standpoint is we do what you ask us to do. And so, for instance, we have the Seaside Inn case that came up, recently. It's hard to anticipate those kinds of things coming up, and that you asked us to work on it, so we work on it. Just to give you a little bit of a flavor for some of the things going on, we have 3 trials going on in the next 30 days. We have a criminal prosecution against the Pickering property. We have a criminal prosecution against the Carnes property, and we have a civil trial against one of the sober living homes up on Azul. I'm trying to remember the exact address, but so those are things that come up in response to what we're asked to do. We try to be cost efficient and get cases settled, and when we can, but it's just really difficult to predict, without having a crystal ball. But to help keep track of it, though, we can very easily provide you with monthly sort of breakdowns of all the various different billings that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to squeeze $200,000 out of the budget that I think I'm going to spend, no matter whether I make it look better and then go and overspend what I am, because I have to anyway. I'm just trying to think through, again, all the rest of the things about how we're budgeting and what we manage to. So that was the reason for. I mean, it's one of the very few increases we had in our budget. So.
Well, I think we have sorry.
Yeah. Pardon?
I think if we have a better idea of what we're looking at monthly, we can better monitor those costs and say, hey, we're reaching a critical point here.
Or explain why.
Right.
More explanation, why are we being so high in these different areas?
Oh, okay. So we're going to leave it as is at the moment anyway. Is that conclusion here?
The good news is that we do try to recover costs wherever we can, and we received a $56,000 check today from one of our code enforcement actions that will go back into the budget. So,
okay, community services. I guess probably 225. I mean, 225 is where the list of the $680,000 for community activity things and others. So we've pared back some. I don't know if there's any thoughts on appropriateness of paring back more or less there. So
I'd like to see something that tells us what the goal of each of these are, and have we met that goal, and how much each of these has cost the city. Do these numbers include all of the overhead, overtime, police services, the actual true cost of each of these events?
No, they don't. These are external costs where we're writing checks to somebody.
Okay,
So it doesn't include staff time. That's included in the personnel budget. That covers all this stuff.
So can we get information on each of these that tells us the true cost of these and what we're trying to accomplish with them, and have we met them, our goals, before we just continue to do something that maybe is not the best use of our money, given that we're, again, trying to find $1.5 million.
But if you look at page 220, it does give some flavor to quite a few of the events.
Well, let's take the fireworks, 4th of July fireworks, for example. I think that mostly money is for the fireworks themselves. I know there's a lot of ancillary cost. There's over 100,000 visitors to our city for this event. This is one of our showcase events, and what makes Dana Point so special is a lot of these events we do. So, you know, there's a lot of costs in these, but they provide benefits to our residents. I mean, I think many generations of families have enjoyed fireworks here, and a lot of people come here to see them. So,
And I
think we have to be careful when
picked
we
the
start
one thing that
pairing.
we all agreed. 4th of July fireworks. But I would, you know, I'm not paring these things down arbitrarily. We need, and I think that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that tells me what are each of these trying to accomplish, how much is the actual true cost, not just the check, but, you know, what does it cost the city for each of these, and have we met those goals that we're trying to meet? And, you know, I mean, we have to start making some hard decisions here. I know nobody wants, I don't want to cut anything. Nobody wants to cut anything, but I don't want to be here in 2020 with, you know, $1.6 million and go, sorry, we didn't do anything. So that's all I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to not do it arbitrarily. I'm trying to do it for some rational, reasonable reason. And to do that, I need information, and I need metrics, and I need to know why we're doing this, how much it's costing us, and how much we're getting back from it, if anything, and what's the non-economic value to the city. So if we could just get that information for each of these, I think we could make an intelligent, reasonable decision whether it makes sense to continue with these. Yeah?
Happy to do it.
Okay. I mean, it seems
Thank you, Mr.
rational to
Denny.
me. Maybe I'm,
I think to be
planet.
fair, your staff will say that each one of these events meets their goals. The question is, do they meet your goals?
what is the goal? I don't even know what their goal is.
Their goal is to engage the community.
Well, that's, I mean, lots of things engage the community, but we
Agreed.
have to start
And so you'll
looking
each
at
have to evaluate, and your
economics.
council will have to tell us the direction on whether or not we've met those goals.
Right, I mean-
So for example, are we meeting them at the Winterfest when we have the kids from Urge Dana come and light the Christmas tree? You know, the staff would say they absolutely have met their goal in that event. Is
Well-
there 1,000 people there? There isn't. But, so I think it's going to be an important exercise for your council to go through to
Will
help
be.
us understand what your priorities are, and we can
Exactly.
adjust accordingly.
And you know, if we have and maybe it's just a wonderful sounding, you know, event, not necessarily that one, but a wonderful sounding event. We get 1,000 people, and it costs the city, you know, $50,000 in police services, overtime, and staff, and we decide, okay, with $1.6 million that we need to find, maybe we don't do that every year. So I would like to know what is the staff's goal, because that would be interesting information, and the true cost of each of these and what it has actually brought to the city. And then we can make those kind of policy decisions or harder decisions.
My concern here, and I mean, I don't disagree. Ultimately, as we look at where we spend money, our overall goal is to get them out and prioritize what we do. I'm just not sure in the next 3 weeks, essentially, how much of that we're going to be able to drill down on with realistic, you know, data. I mean, if we could, it'd be great, you know, but.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not saying we have to do this in the next, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, moving forward, this is something I would like to see brought to the council so that we can make these determinations that this is the best use of the money when we're trying to be a little more judicious with our money.
You know, this is one of the things I've been talking with Arts and Culture on for probably a year. I've been talking with Mr. Denny about it a little bit. And we have a lot of activities on here, well, quite a few, that fall under arts and culture, in my opinion. I mean, concerts in the park, music is part of the arts. They should have input there. Arts Festival, Arts Culture Commission, they should have input there. I mean, does it make sense to kind of wrap some of these under arts and culture, give them a budget, let them manage it to see, and then, start talking about what are the priorities of that commission? And, I mean, we can give them direction, obviously, because we're ultimately the decision maker on that. But get that group together and say, where are we going to take Dana Point? Does it make sense to have all free concerts, or is it something we could take a look at and say, a couple of these concerts that we're going to do this year, we're going to do a bigger act, and we're going to make them 4 feet and charge, and we could actually generate revenue. I mean, if you look at what goes on down in Doheny with Doheny's Blues Fest, Ohana, Sabroso, the different events they're doing down there and the kind of revenue that generates, why are we not looking at things like that as a city to
Absolutely.
generate additional revenue?
Absolutely.
I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do that, but it's something we should be looking at, and we may or may not decide to do it.
And we may decide that some things we could do better and bigger and, involve our Visit Dana Point people and,
Exactly.
make it something that people come to. But I can't make that determination without
No, I'm
input
not,
from various
I'm
people.
not disagreeing with you.
Okay.
I just think those are things we need to start looking at.
Yeah.
And like, there are some things on there that, nothing on here is a sacred cow. I mean, in my opinion.
Maybe the
nothing is.
fireworks.
Yeah. all
Well,
right.
yeah.
I think we all agree
Well,
with the
I'm
fireworks.
pretty sure that one
All right.
doesn't have to be sacred. Everyone's going
Right.
to say we're going to do
Nor
that.
is it a cow, but.
Yeah.
But,
So,
and I'd like input not only from arts and culture, but from our resorts,
yeah,
do they get, people checking into the resorts for this? Is this something that they could see as making it a bigger event that attract people?
And I think we need to look at some other things on here as well. I mean, the bike race is a perfect example. It's something that we started as a city to help seed that, to get it going, and we're phasing it out. And I think there are other things that, when we start, as a city, it's not our job to run all of this stuff. We can get you going, but at some point you have to stand on your own. And I think there are some other things in here we could take a look at, saying, you know what, you're there, you've got a couple more years, and then you're just not, you're not going to be a line item in our budget anymore. We could still make a decision at some point, we want to sponsor it just as a sponsor. But you can't count on us to meet your budget every year, and then this is not going to be there every single year, depending on if we have the money to do it or not.
Okay.
So,
All right, good, thanks. Any other, yes, Mr. Vazorek.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I mean, since we're here, and I think this is one of the reasons that we're here, and we clarified when we began, is we were going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb and see if we could find any savings wherever they were. So, as we've been going through each thing, people have been picking out one or two things. Unfortunately, you said it well, Madam Mayor. I mean, I don't think any of us want to cut any of these things. We would love to be in such financial shape that we could simply offer all these things. Unfortunately, what we're hearing, though, is that we're going to need to start making some of these tough decisions. And as Mr. Killebrew put it, it's tough as a politician, but that's what we're here for. We can't push these off and delay them. So, I went through this already. Some of you may know that already. And, I noticed some things, because this is a chance for us. This is a reflection of our priorities. One of the first things I noticed was the barbecue championship has been eliminated. That's $90,000. That's a big savings. So, I'm not sitting here advocating we're going to go the other way and put the money back in. But as some of you may know, there are some ancillary negative consequences to doing that. And it may be for all of these events, but there's some that we actually know already, I think, so we don't really need to push this off. And the other comment I want to make is, this is a public meeting. People knew we were going to be discussing the budget. We had one public comment. I'm a little bit, shocked about it, but maybe, that's, that's why they elected us, was to make these tough decisions. So at any rate, I'm looking at this. So like I said, there is a negative effect to eliminating the barbecue championship. Okay, well, that's something we need to take into account. Is it enough that we need to put it back in? No, probably not. So we saved $90,000 there, but it does raise the question why. I understand Mr. Killebrew put together the budget, and it's not his job to make these policy calls for us, what our priorities are. And so he did a very good job of trying to make the budget balance. But I do think right now, tonight, we should go over some of these things. So, I guess I'll start with the bike race was mentioned already as a great example of a discussion that we had. And I think the council had the courage to have the discussion to say, look, we've been giving you $20,000. We seeded you. We gave you every opportunity to succeed. But at a certain point, this is not an entitlement. We're not going to continue to fund this forever. So we made that decision to phase it out. We didn't want to cut it off because we didn't want the bike race to go away. We all supported the bike race continuing. So we thought the best approach was to, phase it out and allow them a chance to stand on their own, because I don't think anybody thought that we should continue to fund it forever. And so, that's what we're doing with the bike race. And I'm not going to contest that either. We're reducing it to 10 and then we're going down to 0. So I did have a question, because one of the numbers that jumped out at me was on the symphony. We're giving them $20,000, yet we are continuing to give them $20,000 for the next 2 budget cycles. So I'm wondering, why, or what's the difference, or why? To me, it seems very similar. I think we all like the symphony. I think we would all like to see it succeed. But the question is this an entitlement? Are we going to continue to fund it forever? Is this, one of our priorities, especially when we're eliminating the barbecue championship? So, that was one thing that jumped out at me. I mean, there's many that we can go over, but I'll just start with that. And it just seemed to me it made sense to treat it exactly like the bike race, that we want it to remain, we like it, but it's time for it to stand on its own. So, my suggestion would be that we phase it out. We lower this. We could save $10,000 here, and then $20,000 and moving forward. And that is, a structural solution, because it is moving forward as opposed to $20,000 in perpetuity. So that would be my direction, that we take a look at that.
And that's why I would like more information before I can do any of these. Perhaps something like the symphony is something that the resorts, if we went to them and said, is this something that people who stay in your resorts would want to go see? Could the symphony start charging more for it? I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't have enough information. It may actually be that we could generate revenue through things that people want to go do. I don't know if that's one of them. I don't have enough information, I would say, at this point, to say yay or nay on anything on this list. But what I would like is that information, so that when we sit down here, we're not just making arbitrary choices. We are based on something that is reasonable and rational, and information that we can put out to the public and say, this is why we're not going to fund this one anymore. Not just because, seems like not a good idea. So that, for me, I'm not prepared to say yay or nay to any of these tonight.
I have a question, so I'll just challenge you to see. No, so we have the concerts in the park, and we have 7, right? I was curious about why not 5, 6, or 8. Why was 7 the number? Do we have some? reason for that?
Other than that's what we've always done.
Yep.
I think there was actually one year we had 8, and it got back down to 7, but that's the number of weekends that we felt comfortable between 4th of July and Labor Day that we could have a Sunday concert in the park.
Okay. I was just looking because the direct costs about $22,000 each, but then there's also a number of other costs related to them. So, there's $50,000 if you went to 5, for example, a direct cost, and probably another bit in other costs. So just dollars.
There are other costs that I know I've had conversations with Councilmember Vic Swark about. There are other costs to quite a few of our events that you don't see, and that is, since I've been here, we worked really hard to get nonprofits, Dana Point nonprofits, involved in our events to provide, to basically to further along the culture of Dana Point as well. One of the things that I was asked when I first got here is, what would you do differently? And I said, we need to have something more here than a place where people come and put their heads down at night and get up in the morning, go to work, and on the weekends they go to neighboring cities to activities. That we wanted to make our activities a little more engaging, and one of the things that we looked at early on was, how do we get the nonprofits involved and help them with their causes, and that's a big part of it. So when you look at the concerts in the park, Fifth Marine Support Group is a
So there
integral part
are
of those.
unintended consequences of not doing them, right? That you don't see here. Other people make.
The barbecue championship happens to be a similar event where it's a city-run event. There isn't an outsider like there was with the bike race, with the symphony, with some of these other things that we're talking about. But a city-run event where we've integrated nonprofits. The barbecue took the place of the VFW's car washes that made up a third of their budget, and they lost those with the drought, and they weren't allowed to do their car washes. We brought them in to the barbecue championship and pretty much not only replaced that third, but upped it a little bit of a notch. So you'll see in our first conversation today in the city council department, the VFW, the $10,000 there was new, and that was in lieu of what they would make from the barbecue event, and it did not keep them whole. They made about $18,000 a year. Or they made $18,000 last year on the barbecue, and I put $10,000 in the budget. So, but we've talked about including them in our concerts in the park to do barbecues at our concerts in the park to help them with that now new hole in their budget. But there are other consequences.
Yes. And speaking to Mr. Vazorik's point that no one's here, I think in 2020, when we have a $1.6 million hole and we start making drastic cuts, we'll probably be in the community center. So I think what we're all trying to do is avoid that and work. But again, I'm not prepared tonight to make a decision on any one specific thing without knowing the true cost of it and what the city is getting from it. So that's just my 2 cents.
I've got a quick question. Winter Festival and tree lighting, what's that mean, move from 81 to 2430? What account was that?
Right, the line below, recreation programs, it just moved up into this community activities.
So is that the one in, where is that? Is that the Pines Park or La Plaza? Which one is that?
Yeah, La Plaza. And
It also includes
Pines
Pines
now.
now.
now we added Pines.
Okay. Does that also incorporate when we have Arch Dana come in and light the trees?
Yes, correct.
Because those are 2 different events, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Do you, we're in the next one?
Well, actually, before we move on, madam, I want to be clear. I mean, I'm not sure what direction do you think you got out of that?
We're going to come back with some more information about each of the programs for
The
future
cost,
discussion. And
the goals?
I know what I'm hearing is it may not be within the next 3 weeks, the decisions, but there may have to be some decisions made by council.
As
in this
opposed
arena.
to, we've been going over and making decisions on every single thing until we get to this one, and suddenly we're not going to make any decisions or look at it as a whole and see what all the numbers are and figure out if, you know, we have to make cuts or we have enough money or how much overall money we saved. You know, part of the beginning, what we were talking about at the beginning was everything was on the table and every amount of money mattered until we got to this, where this is all discretionary spending, and now we're going to punt.
No, because
I'm surprised, but I would like to see, you know, what it means if we were to phase some of these out. And I'm not picking on the symphony. That was one thing that jumped out at me. There are other ones, but you know, we came here tonight to talk about this. We came here last week. We put this off until tonight, and now we're putting it off again.
Well-
So at some point, we're going to have to make a decision.
Yes.
That's why we were elected, so.
that is
I would
true.
like to hopefully see some of that in the future. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, the problem won't go away until we make decisions. We just have to decide when, right? So, I agree. Thank you.
I think we all agree with that.
Parks, I guess, is next. So 232, 33-ish area.
Was it just kind of an aside? I mean, on page 232, we do bee extermination in the parks. You know, there's a worldwide shortage on bees. They're dying like crazy. Do we have to kill them? Or is there another way to relocate them? I mean,
We also do bee relocation,
okay.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we've moved to B relocation.
If there's
We
any
haven't
savings there,
moved
we'll
our
just-
budget document accordingly, which we'll have
I
to
was
do.
just wondering.
We are going to update our budget document for the adopted budget to say bee relocation.
Well, unfortunately, I've had some experience with this. Some of my office buildings have had bee swarms, and for my knowledge, we're in some sort of flyaway for bees, and it hits us too. So it's an item that we have to be concerned about.
In terms of median landscape, I mean, I guess the numbers here, just in realizing, I mean, I know they were big, I just didn't realize though, and looking at them, the landscape, the annual maintenance of the landscape in the medians at 550 and 570, and all of our parks at 600 and 650. I mean, they're virtually identical. The median landscaping costs as much as our parks to landscape. Is there any room to, I mean, it just is a big number, I guess. It's one of those.
We have reduced it to actuals. You'll see in the 18 and 19 proposed budgets from the higher 17 amended on the annual maintenance. We are proposing to increase some repair and replacement because you probably noticed some of the medians really need it. Particularly Selva is one that's getting a lot of our attention lately. But, you know, certainly we'll take the council's direction if you want to find ways to continue to curtail our maintenance out there, we'll certainly try and do that.
So you're saying, Mr. Denny, in item 2450 on page 232, that first line item, annual maintenance, has been reduced from 650 to 550 and then 575 in year 2019? Those are the numbers, adjustments you were talking about?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So is this, as we go to more drought-tolerant landscaping, for instance, on Crown Valley, we could expect to see a reduction in the maintenance in that area of town, correct?
Absolutely.
And so that was something we were to
Owing
look
costs.
at citywide in terms of what's in our medians. We could, and that's actually a structural fee, or a structural change.
Correct.
That could cost us some money as we start replacing the vegetation.
Correct.
So maybe that's something, as a council, we need to take a look at, is what are in those medians? I mean, that's a pretty big number annually.
It's a very big number.
And you start looking at parks and medians together, we're could take a pretty big chunk out of that 1.6 million. You know, if we could do some, but it's gonna cost us some money to do it if we're gonna re-landscape those medians. I mean, I think that's something we'd have to have a deeper discussion about, what it costs to get us there.
And I think we may have to look at, you know, what are we paying? Is there a way to trim those costs besides just,
In the interim, yeah.
yes, not just the medians? I mean, you know, what are we doing? How long has this contract been in effect? Is it something we should be looking at? Are we getting, you know, are we paying the right a market value for what we're getting? I mean, we need to be looking at the big ticket items.
Both
and
the
saying-
landscape maintenance in the parks and the median contracts were bid last year, I believe. So these are fresh RFP contracts.
Okay. I mean, I'm looking at our operating expenditures by type, and we, you know, we just have to be willing to look at each of these types and say, what can we do to get $1.6 million? And if we don't do that, then we're going to have to, in 2020, we're going to have to make cuts that we're not going to be happy with. Do you have more?
No, I just, I mean, yeah, this is the one where, you know, I guess I struggle with, I mean, not that I have any great answers, but when I look at parks and the use they would get generally versus a median, which is, you know, more visual, and realize I'm expending as much keeping the medians looking pretty, which are just things that get driven by, versus the other ones. And I'd like to find a way to do better. I guess I don't have any good, easy answers to that, however, so.
Does anybody else have any comments, suggestions, questions?
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I'll be interested to see what our Financial Review Committee comes up with. All right, so we've gone through the workshop. Is there anything more you wanted to?
We got facilities yet we can take a quick look at. I don't think we're going to find very much, but we should look. And then risk management, and then and non-department. I guess that's all we have left, so. Anything in those areas that we should
You know,
look?
This has always kind of been interesting to me. When we look under risk management on page 241, could somebody explain to me what the quiet zone premium, I mean, I understand it's for the quiet zone. What does that do for us? How much coverage? I mean, just tell me what it is. What's that policy?
Our insurer, JPIA, when we were contemplating putting the quiet zone in, or working with the various agencies to have the quiet zone put in, they went and took action to specifically exclude, or to determine that their coverage specifically includes interaction with rail crossings. And it wasn't too long, at that point in time, it hadn't been too long since the big Metrolink disaster in LA and the huge lawsuits. So we challenged them, and they flew to London and worked with the large banks, insurance companies, and developed a policy that provides us with $20 million of coverage in the event we're dragged into a lawsuit because of an accident at the quiet zone, because we do have some assets there with the signalized intersection in particular. And the cities of San Juan, San Clemente, and Dana Point all participate in this uniquely designed insurance policy. Our cost is $15,000 a year? 17,000 a year.
16 up to 17.5. And how much coverage do we get?
It's $20 million.
Oh, 20 million?
Actually, I'm sorry, I got my decimal off. It's a $2 million policy.
Oh. I was like, wow, 20 million, that's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And how long have we had this policy?
Since we installed the quiet zone, I think it was 4 years ago, maybe? Maybe 4?
4 years, okay. And
So-
do they re-rate based on experience?
Every year we go through a process to, well, it's unique.
Right?
We identified it as I mean, it was a sticking point and a contentious point, particularly with the Hills, who were strong proponents of this, and honestly didn't believe there was liability here. But you know, when your insurer tells you no, you're not covered, the city council took that very seriously. So we worked really hard, and we actually sent, I think you met John Scholl, the executive director of JPIA at your recent training, and his chief, one of his executive staff. They went to London and made presentations and brought back a uniquely designed policy.
So the thinking behind the policy is that the big risk is the indemnification that we have to provide to OCTA and SCRRA, Southern California Railroad Authority. We're stuck with the cost of defense getting up to the point until it's determined that we don't have an indemnification obligation. So they came up with a policy that was, they were hoping, you know, because this is again looking at crystal ball, would be sufficient to cover all the legal costs that would get you through a point where we could raise the arguments that the city is supposed to be immune from liability for these railroad crossings. The federal railroad regulations contemplated that, but it was a little ambiguous, which is why the other agencies wanted the city to be responsible for the indemnification costs if we were the ones that were asking to put in the quiet zone. So it's enough to basically, or it's intended at least to be enough to cover the legal fees getting to a point where you could litigate that issue.
So I know there was at least one death down at San Clemente last year by a person being hit by a train. I think there may have been 2. Have we spoken with San Clemente to see if the quiet zone was brought up? And I don't even know if there was a lawsuit over it or not. But have we checked with them to find out what happened with that? Because I'm assuming they have the same insurance policy for whatever it costs them, but.
From what I recall, the claim did not involve a claim that it was associated with the quiet zone, or they had a claim that was associated with the quiet zone. They have JPIA as an insurer as well. So
Okay,
I'm actually looking at our annual renewal, and it is a $2 million per occurrence and $2 million aggregate, and there's a $100,000 retention, self-insured retention on that. So that is our current policy. And there's been, under the policy period, and it covers all 3 agencies. It began back on February 1st, 13, and there's been no losses reported.
Okay. Well, I guess I'd have this fall under the same thing that Mayor Lewis had all of our community activities. I'd like to see a report on what kind of value do we get out of this. I mean, it seems like a relatively small part of town, but I don't want to give up anything if it makes sense. And but I think it's something we should take a look at in terms of, it's not a lot of money, but they add up.
It's, as your risk manager, also one of my other hats, the exposure here if you get dragged into a lawsuit and don't have insurance.
Well, I guess my question is,
So what I'm saying is if we're going to decide to go the opposite direction and not have insurance, I would want to have a discussion about notifying the railroad that,
Well, I guess my
that
question is-
because we're the ones who asked for the quiet zone, that's the process.
Right, that's my question, is if, would we have to give up, well, if we're not insured, I think we'd give up the quiet zone. Would that go back to the old indemnification that we're not responsible, we put the signals in the, they blow the horns, I don't know.
The reason we ended up where we're at is because under the rules, the federal rules, we're the agency that had to ask for the quiet zone, so we created the liability, this perceived liability ourselves.
If there is a liability.
If there is one, if there is one. And if we decide to go without the insurance, I think we're at the same, the two of us were in the trenches on this one. I think we'd be at the same spot saying, if you don't have the coverage, it's difficult for us to recommend that we keep the quiet zone, and there's a notification process to
Well, I
eliminate it.
wouldn't expect to keep the quiet zone if we don't keep the coverage.
Okay.
But I
So
think
there's a
it's more of-
notification process for us to notify the agencies that have both have acts or control the right of way and the trains. There's a period of time that has to take place before they start blowing the horns again.
Right. Well, I'd say just take a look at it. I mean, it's something else that's in there.
I think the point is
Trying to
that we have
understand
to
it.
keep the coverage for a period of time. So if this is something that you wanted to look at, you gotta take into account that there's some lag time, because it takes a while before they start blowing the train horns again.
Right.
And you'd wanna have the coverage until that started.
Well, I'm not even saying I want to get rid of this right now. I just want to understand it more. I mean, what are the real impacts down in that area? It's just another line item that I saw. What is it? How's it work? I don't understand it, so. Okay. That's it.
Okay. Non-department, that's tail end, right? So 243, 244, 45. Could I ask about library hours on Sunday? Is that general feeling here about we would pay $45,000 to keep the library open for Sundays. Is that, I don't know if anybody knows whether that's highly used or?
My daughter uses it on Sunday.
Yeah.
When we do concerts at the park, is it?
There, that's a great service.
Yeah, so,
And there will be a point at which the city will not have to make this contribution. The library operates based on a formula that's a combination of population, assessed valuation, and circulation. And we're almost to the point where Dana Point will reach a threshold of obtaining 7 days a week of library service. We're right now at 6.5, and we pay that additional half. And so we've asked for information from the county to try and anticipate when we'll cross that threshold, because when that happens, then this contribution goes away.
yeah, I was curious because we're already a donor city by that definition, but I guess we're not a big enough donor. Is that it?
Almost.
So should we be pushing out a message on social media for people to go check out books?
Okay. Okay. Anything else that we've gone through? We've gotten a little bit, I guess. That was at least a start. Okay. I don't have anything else, Madam Mayor.
Does anybody have anything else? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, we're going to adjourn back into closed session.
Oh, we are? Okay. All right, so what do I do, adjourn this into closed session?
Adjourning to closed session, yes.
Okay. Do I need a motion or anything? Okay, adjourning into closed session.